Welcome, weary traveler, to the shadowed tale of the world that lies beneath our feet. Tonight, we delve deep into the story of the Underdark, that vast realm of eternal darkness, where ancient secrets slumber in chambers, carved by time itself. This is a journey through depths that predate the rise of kingdoms, through corridors where the very stones remember the birth of worlds. So settle in, let the gentle whisper of distant waters guide you, and allow yourself to drift as we explore the complete story of the realm below, where darkness holds dominion and wonder dwells in the deepest places of the earth. In the beginning, there was only stone, beneath the young world that would one day know the warmth of sunlight and the gentle touch of rain. Vast quantities of rock lay compressed and silent, waiting for the forces that would transform them into something far more extraordinary. The formation of what would become known as the Underdark began not with the conscious efforts of any thinking being, but with the primal forces that shaped the world itself in its earliest epochs. Deep within the planetary core, pressures beyond mortal comprehension generated heat that would seek release through any avenue available. The first stirrings of what would become the deepest realms occurred when these geological forces encountered pockets of softer stone, areas where water had seeped down through countless layers over unimaginable spans of time. The interaction between extreme heat and the moisture trapped in sedimentary layers created steam pressures that fractured bedrock in patterns that would influence the architecture of the underground world for millions of years to come. The earthquakes that shook the primeval world were not merely random disasters, but sculptors working on a scale that dwarfed any artistic vision conceived by mortal minds. Each tremor that rippled through the planetary crust created new fissures, widened existing cracks, and occasionally opened vast chambers where none had existed before. The most powerful of these seismic events could shift entire mountain ranges, creating the deep rifts and abyssal chasms that would later serve as highways and barriers for the civilizations that would arise in the darkness below. Volcanic activity played its own crucial role in crafting the underground landscape. Lava flows that never reached the surface carved their own tunnels through solid rock, following the paths of least resistance and creating networks of interconnected passages. When these molten rivers cooled and hardened, they left behind hollow tubes that stretched for miles through the Earth's interior. The gases released by volcanic processes also contributed to the formation of caverns, as superheated vapors dissolved limestone and other soluble minerals, leaving behind chambers of breathtaking scope and beauty. But the purely physical forces that shaped the early Underdark were not the only influences at work in those ancient times. Magic itself, raw and untamed in the world's youth, permeated the deepest places where conventional natural laws held less sway. Areas that would later be known as sources of Fairsrest radiation were formed during these primordial epochs, when the fundamental forces of creation were still settling into the patterns that would govern reality for ages to come. The Fairsrest that would eventually characterize so much of the Underdark's mystical nature was born from the intersection of multiple magical influences. Ancient rituals performed by beings whose names have been lost to history, the death throes of powerful entities from the earliest days of creation, and the simple accumulation of magical energy in places where it could not easily dissipate, all contributed to the formation of these zones where magic itself behaved differently than it did in the world above. As the world's surface began to stabilize and support the first forms of life, the chambers and passages far below remained in constant flux. Water continued to play its patient role, wearing away stone grain by grain over geological ages. Underground rivers that had never known sunlight carved canyons through the bedrock, creating the gorges that would later serve as natural roadways for the creatures that would call the depths their home. The largest of these waterways eventually formed the underground seas that would become the domain of the aboleth and other ancient aquatic powers. The three distinct levels that would come to define the Underdark's geography were not created through any single cataclysm, but rather emerged gradually, as different depths experienced different degrees of change and development. The Upper Dark, closest to the surface, was most influenced by drainage from above and the occasional intrusion of surface-dwelling creatures. The Middle Dark formed in the zone where geological stability allowed for the creation of the largest and most stable chamber systems. The Lower Dark developed in regions where the planet's internal heat and pressure created conditions so extreme that only the most adaptable or magically resilient life forms could hope to survive. The role of burrowing creatures in expanding and connecting the underground realm cannot be understated. Purple worms, following instincts bred into them across countless generations, chewed their way through solid rock in pursuit of minerals and prey. These massive creatures created tunnels that served as arteries connecting distant regions of the Underdark, and their abandoned burrows provided ready-made highways for smaller beings. The purple worm's ceaseless digging also helped to maintain air circulation throughout the deep places, ensuring that the growing network of caves and tunnels would not become stagnant death traps. Umber hulks, with their mandibles capable of boring through almost any material, created their own contribution to the underground infrastructure. Unlike the purple worms, which followed largely random paths in their eternal hunger, umber hulks displayed a rudimentary intelligence that led them to create more purposeful tunnel networks. Their excavations often connected natural cave systems that would otherwise have remained isolated, creating the first crude transportation networks in the deep earth. Other creatures also played their part in the great work of excavation and expansion. Bullets, though more commonly associated with surface environments, occasionally ventured deep enough to contribute their own tunnels to the growing network. Zorn, beings from the elemental plane of earth, moved through stone as easily as fish move through water, leaving behind chambers and passages that followed no earthly logic but added their own strange beauty to the underground architecture. The first stirrings of truly organized excavation came not from mindless burrowing creatures but from the earliest intelligent beings to recognize the potential of the underground realm. Ancient civilizations whose names are remembered only in the oldest legends began the first systematic mining operations, following veins of precious metals and gems into the Earth's heart. These early miners, working with tools that were primitive by later standards but represented the height of their technological achievement, began the process of transforming natural caves into spaces suitable for habitation. The discovery of the first major gem deposits deep beneath the surface provided powerful incentives for continued exploration and excavation. Diamonds, emeralds, and other precious stones of extraordinary size and clarity could be found in the deep places, often in concentrations that seemed almost too good to be true. The wealth represented by these discoveries financed ever more ambitious excavation projects, as entire communities devoted themselves to the dangerous but potentially lucrative work of deep mining. As these early underground settlements began to establish themselves, they faced challenges that their surface-dwelling ancestors had never encountered. The constant darkness required new forms of illumination, leading to experiments with phosphorescent fungi, heat stones, and eventually magical light sources. The lack of growing things forced these pioneers to develop new relationships with the strange flora that could survive in lightless conditions, learning which fungi were edible and which were deadly, which lichens could be cultivated, and which were better left undisturbed. The problem of fresh air in the deep tunnels led to innovations in engineering that would influence underground architecture for millennia to come. The early miners learned to follow air currents when planning their excavations, ensuring that their deepest workings would not become suffocating tombs. They developed systems of shafts and vents that could move air through their tunnel networks, and they learned to recognize the warning signs that indicated dangerous gases or oxygen depletion in their working areas. Water management became another crucial skill for those who would make their homes in the depths. Underground streams could provide fresh water, but they could also flood entire complexes without warning. The early settlers learned to channel water flow to their advantage, creating systems that could provide both drinking water and power for their primitive machinery, while directing excess flow away from their living areas. The gradual expansion of these early settlements created the need for better transportation and communication between different underground communities. Trade routes began to develop along the natural passages and artificial tunnels that connected the various mining settlements. These early trade networks carried not just goods, but also information, leading to the spread of techniques and technologies that allowed for ever more sophisticated underground construction projects. The introduction of magic into underground construction marked a crucial turning point in the development of the Underdark, as a realm capable of supporting large populations. Spells that could move massive quantities of stone, enchantments that could strengthen tunnel walls against collapse, and magical methods of lighting that did not consume air or produce dangerous smoke all contributed to making the deep places more hospitable to long-term habitation. As magical knowledge became more widespread among the underground communities, new possibilities opened for the expansion and development of the deep realm. Teleportation circles began to connect distant settlements, though the unpredictable effects of Fairsrest made such magical transport unreliable in many areas. Spells that could purify air and water made it possible to establish communities in areas that would otherwise have been uninhabitable. Magical agriculture allowed for the cultivation of food sources that could thrive in the lightless environment of the underground realm. The establishment of permanent magical infrastructure marked the true beginning of the Underdark as a civilization rather than merely a collection of mining camps and refugee settlements. Permanent portals, though still rare and dangerous to maintain, began to provide reliable transportation between the most important underground cities. Magical workshops powered by the strange energies that permeated the deep places began producing tools and weapons that could not be created on the surface. Libraries and schools dedicated to the study of underground survival techniques ensured that the knowledge necessary for life in the depths would be preserved and improved upon by each successive generation. The growing sophistication of underground society also led to the first systematic exploration of the deepest places, regions that had never been touched by any form of intelligent life. These expeditions into the lower dark revealed wonders and terrors that challenged the explorers' understanding of what was possible in the world they thought they knew. Strange forms of life that seemed to exist in defiance of all natural law, magical phenomena that created pockets of altered reality, and evidence of presences so ancient and alien that their very existence called into question fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence itself. As the centuries passed and the underground realm became more stable and established, the three-level structure that would define the Underdark for ages to come began to solidify. The Upper Dark became the domain of communities that maintained significant contact with the surface world, trading with surface dwellers, and serving as a buffer zone between the world above and the stranger realms below. The Middle Dark developed into the heartland of underground civilization, where the great cities and kingdoms of the depths would establish themselves and flourish. The Lower Dark remained largely unexplored and mysterious, a frontier region where only the most hardy and desperate would venture in search of opportunities that could not be found in the more civilized levels above. The transformation of the underground realm from a collection of natural caves and mining tunnels into the vast, interconnected network known as the Underdark was complete. What had begun as random geological processes had been shaped by the efforts of countless generations into something unprecedented in the history of the world, an entire civilization existing in the spaces between the foundations of the surface realm, ready to serve as home to the exiles, refugees, and seekers who would make the darkness their domain. The geography of the Underdark defies every assumption that surface dwellers hold about the nature of landscape and terrain, where the world above spreads itself in two dimensions across plains and valleys, marked by the familiar rhythm of hills rising toward mountain peaks. The realm below exists in a state of perpetual three-dimensional complexity that challenges the very concept of direction and distance. Here, in chambers carved from living rock over spans of time that dwarf the rise and fall of surface empires, the fundamental rules of geography have been rewritten by forces both natural and supernatural. To understand the true scope of the underground realm, one must first abandon the surface dweller's notion of horizontal travel as the primary means of moving from place to place. In the Underdark, vertical movement is not merely possible, but essential, as the most direct route between 2 points may require ascending or descending through multiple levels of caverns, each with its own unique characteristics and challenges. The three-dimensional nature of underground travel means that a journey which appears short on any conventional map may in reality require days or weeks of careful navigation through a maze of interconnected chambers and passages. The abysses that puncture the underground landscape represent perhaps the most awe-inspiring and terrifying features of the deep realm. These vast voids stretch downward for distances that seem to approach the infinite, their walls disappearing into darkness so complete that even the enhanced vision of Underdark natives cannot penetrate to their depths. Standing at the edge of one of these tremendous chasms, a traveler experiences a vertigo that goes beyond mere physical discomfort to touch something primal and unsettling in the depths of consciousness itself. The largest of the Underdark abysses rival the greatest canyons of the surface world in their scope, but their vertical orientation creates an entirely different set of psychological and practical challenges for those who encounter them. Where a surface canyon can be crossed by finding a narrower point or building a bridge, an abyss presents barriers that seem absolute in their impassability. The walls of these great voids often stretch for dozens of miles in sheer drops that offer no footholds for climbing and no ledges that might provide rest for flying creatures attempting to cross. The formation of these abysses speaks to catastrophic events in the deep places that occurred on scales barely comprehensible to mortal minds. Some were carved by underground rivers that fell through natural shafts with such force that they scoured away millions of tons of solid rock over geological ages. Others were created by the collapse of vast chamber systems, leaving behind voids where once there had been stone pillars supporting immense weights of overburden. Still others show signs of having been deliberately excavated by beings of tremendous power, though the purposes behind such monumental construction projects remain mysteries that may never be fully understood. The civilizations that have established themselves near these tremendous features have developed remarkable solutions to the challenges they present. Elaborate systems of bridges, some carved from single pieces of stone, and others woven from the silk of giant spiders, span the narrower chasms and provide passage for those brave enough to trust their lives to such constructions. The wider abysses have spawned the development of entire industries devoted to transportation, with specially trained flying mounts and magical conveyances providing the only means of crossing from one side to the other. The echoes that travel through these vast spaces create acoustic phenomena that border on the supernatural. A shout at the edge of an abyss may return as a whisper minutes later, distorted by its journey through the darkness, until it becomes almost unrecognizable. The constant play of air currents within these great voids creates sounds that range from barely audible sighs to roaring winds that can be heard for miles through the surrounding tunnel networks. These acoustic properties have been exploited by some Underdark dwellers as communication systems, with coded messages transmitted across vast distances through carefully timed and positioned sound signals. The underground rivers that flow through the Underdark represent another category of geographical feature that defies surface expectations, while creating the backbone of life in the deep places. These waterways follow courses that have been carved through solid rock by the patient work of countless centuries, creating networks of aquatic highways that connect distant regions of the underground realm. Unlike their surface counterparts, these rivers flow through landscapes that never knew the touch of sunlight, following gradients that were determined entirely by the internal structure of the planetary crust. The character of underground rivers differs dramatically from surface waterways in ways that go far beyond their lack of exposure to sun and sky. The water that flows through these Stygian channels is often mineral-rich, to the point where it takes on colors and properties that seem almost magical to those unaccustomed to such phenomena. Rivers that flow red with dissolved iron paint, their banks with rust-colored deposits that create landscapes of surreal beauty. Streams heavy with dissolved limestone leave behind formations of flowstone and travertine that build up over time into natural sculptures of breathtaking delicacy and complexity. The temperature of underground rivers varies dramatically depending on their proximity to geothermal features and the depth at which they flow. Some carry water so cold that ice forms along their edges, even in the relatively warm environment of the Underdark's middle reaches. Others flow with water, heated by contact with magma chambers far below, creating steaming torrents that fill their surrounding passages with warm, humid air that supports unique ecosystems of heat-loving organisms. The most remarkable of the underground rivers are those that flow upward, defying the surface dwellers' understanding of how water should behave under the influence of gravity. These mysterious waterways are products of complex pressure systems created by the intersection of multiple water sources at different depths, sometimes augmented by magical influences that alter the normal behavior of flowing water. The sight of a river flowing up a steep slope, or even cascading upward through a vertical shaft, represents one of the Underdark's most disorienting and memorable spectacles. Navigation along underground rivers presents challenges unknown to surface sailors and river pilots. The absence of landmarks visible from a distance means that travelers must rely on their knowledge of subtle variations in water flow, temperature, and mineral content to determine their location along a river's course. The acoustic properties of water flowing through enclosed stone channels create distinctive sound signatures that experienced Underdark river runners can read like maps, identifying familiar stretches of river by the particular note of water striking stone formations. The vast vaults that represent some of the Underdark's most spectacular features are chambers so enormous that they contain entire ecosystems within their boundaries. These cathedral-like spaces, some of which stretch for dozens of miles across and rise to heights that disappear into darkness above, represent the ultimate expression of the underground realm's capacity for grandeur. Standing in the center of one of these tremendous chambers, a traveler might easily forget that countless tons of rock and earth lie overhead, as the vault's dimensions approach those of small countries. The formation of these great vaults required geological processes operating on scales that challenge human understanding. Some were carved by underground seas that existed for millions of years before draining away through newly formed channels, leaving behind empty spaces of staggering size. Others represent the results of massive volcanic events that occurred entirely underground, with magma chambers larger than surface mountains, eventually cooling and leaving behind hollow spaces of corresponding magnitude. The internal geography of the largest vaults can be as complex as any surface landscape, complete with hills, valleys, and elevated plateaus, all contained within the boundaries of a single enormous chamber. Underground rivers flow across the floors of these great spaces, sometimes forming lakes that stretch beyond the range of vision. The acoustic properties of these vast chambers create sound effects that range from perfect silence to thunderous reverberation, depending on the activities taking place within them and the specific geological characteristics of their walls and ceilings. The air circulation patterns within the great vaults often create weather systems that mirror those of the surface world in miniature. Temperature differences between the chamber floors and the distant ceilings generate air currents that can approach the strength of surface winds. In some vaults, these air movements are strong enough and consistent enough to support flying creatures that never venture outside the boundaries of their aerial domain. The ecosystems that develop within the great vaults represent some of the Underdark's most complex and stable biological communities. The large spaces and relatively stable environmental conditions allow for the development of food webs that approach the complexity of surface ecosystems. Vast forests of fungi spread across the vault floors, providing habitat for countless species of smaller organisms. Predators and prey establish territories and migration patterns within the boundaries of single chambers that could contain entire surface kingdoms. The underground seas that occupy some of the Underdark's most magnificent vaults represent bodies of water that rival the surface world's greatest lakes in their size and depth. These dark waters, never touched by sunlight and often connected to mysterious sources far below, support forms of life that exist nowhere else in the known world. The largest of these underground seas stretch beyond the horizon when viewed from their shores, their far edges lost in darkness that swallows even the most powerful magical illumination. The waters of the underground seas often possess characteristics that distinguish them dramatically from surface bodies of water. Some are heavily laden with dissolved minerals that give them distinctive colors and properties. Others are kept warm by geothermal sources, creating tropical conditions in chambers that exist miles beneath the surface. The most mysterious of these waters seem to possess almost supernatural properties, with some reported to have healing effects, while others are said to induce visions or alter the perceptions of those who drink from them. Navigation across the underground seas requires skills and knowledge entirely different from surface seamanship. The absence of stars, sun, or any other celestial reference points means that navigators must rely on their knowledge of current patterns, water temperature variations, and the acoustic properties of different regions of the sea. The boundaries of these bodies of water are often irregular coastlines of bewildering complexity, with bays, inlets, and archipelagos of stone islands creating navigation challenges that can confound even experienced Underdark sailors. The tides that affect some underground seas represent one of the Underdark's most puzzling phenomena, as these bodies of water have no apparent connection to surface oceans or lunar influences. The regular rise and fall of water levels in certain underground seas seems to follow patterns that are unique to each individual body of water, possibly related to deep geological processes or magical influences that operate according to cycles, entirely separate from surface world phenomena. The gorges that slice through the Underdark landscape serve as some of the realm's most important transportation corridors, providing natural highways that connect different regions and levels of the underground world. These deep canyons, carved by the patient work of underground rivers over geological ages, offer travelers relatively straightforward routes through otherwise impassable terrain. The floors of these gorges often provide the easiest paths for overland travel in the Underdark, though they also create tactical challenges for those who must travel through them. The walls of Underdark gorges rise in vertical cliffs that can stretch for hundreds of feet above the canyon floors, creating natural barriers that channel movement along predictable routes. This characteristic makes gorges simultaneously valuable as transportation corridors and dangerous as potential trap sites where travelers can find themselves with limited options for escape or evasion. The acoustic properties of these enclosed canyon systems mean that sounds travel efficiently along their lengths, making it difficult for travelers to move through them without announcing their presence to anyone who might be listening. The microclimates that develop within Underdark gorges often support unique forms of plant and animal life that depend on the specific conditions created by the canyon environment. The walls of these gorges provide surfaces for the growth of specialized lichens and mosses that cannot survive in the open chambers, while the more humid conditions along the canyon floors support different species than those found in the drier environments of the surrounding passages. The rifts that scar the Underdark landscape represent some of the realm's most dramatic and dangerous topographical features. These tremendous cracks in the earth, often extending for hundreds of miles in length while remaining relatively narrow in width, were created by tectonic forces of incredible magnitude. The walls of these rifts often rise vertically for miles, creating barriers that seem absolutely impassable except at a few carefully guarded crossing points. The formation of rifts involves geological processes that can reshape entire regions of the Underdark overnight. When tectonic plates shift or major fault lines slip, the resulting rifts can separate regions that were previously connected, cutting trade routes and isolating communities from their neighbors. The unpredictable nature of rift formation means that Underdark civilizations must always be prepared for the possibility that their carefully planned transportation networks might be disrupted by sudden geological changes. The narrow width of most rifts, combined with their tremendous depth, creates unique challenges for anyone attempting to cross them. The vertical walls offer few handholds for climbers, while the great depth makes falls almost inevitably fatal. The development of crossing techniques and equipment represents one of the Underdark's most specialized engineering challenges, with different civilizations creating their own solutions ranging from simple rope bridges to elaborate mechanical systems. The air currents that flow through rifts often create wind effects that can be felt for considerable distances from the rift itself. These air movements are caused by temperature differences between different levels of the rift and pressure variations created by the complex geometry of the crack system. The resulting winds can be powerful enough to affect flying creatures and light objects, adding another layer of difficulty to any attempt to cross these natural barriers. The shafts that penetrate vertically through the Underdark serve as crucial connections between different levels of the underground realm. These deep wells, some natural and others artificially created, provide the most direct routes for vertical travel in a landscape where changes in elevation are often necessary for reaching desired destinations. The circular geometry of most shafts creates unique acoustic and airflow effects that experienced Underdark dwellers learn to interpret as navigational aids. Natural shafts often begin as surface features such as sinkholes or deep wells that have been extended downward through the action of underground water flow or the collapse of underlying chamber systems. The walls of these natural shafts typically show the irregular, weathered surfaces characteristic of water-carved stone, with alcoves and ledges that can provide resting places for climbers, or nesting sites for the flying creatures that often inhabit these vertical passages. Artificial shafts represent some of the Underdark's most impressive engineering achievements, as their creation requires the removal of enormous quantities of solid rock from vertical excavations that can extend for miles in depth. The civilizations that undertake such projects typically do so to establish direct connections between different levels of their territory, or to gain access to resources that lie at specific depths below their main settlements. The air circulation effects created by shafts can be dramatic enough to influence the climate of surrounding areas. Temperature differences between the top and bottom of deep shafts create convection currents that draw air up from the depths or push it down from higher levels. These air movements can create local wind systems that affect not only the immediate vicinity of the shaft, but also connected tunnel networks for considerable distances. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these vast spaces carved from living stone, the mind begins to appreciate the true scope of the world that exists beneath our feet. Each chamber represents eons of patient work by forces both natural and supernatural, creating landscapes that dwarf the greatest achievements of surface engineering, while maintaining a beauty that speaks to the fundamental power of time itself. The darkness that embraces these tremendous spaces is not empty but full of possibility, holding within its depths the promise of wonders yet to be discovered by those brave enough to venture into the realm where geography itself follows different rules than those known in the world above. In the perpetual darkness of the Underdark, where the familiar rhythms of photosynthesis that govern surface ecosystems hold no sway, life has evolved along pathways that challenge every assumption about the fundamental requirements for biological existence. The absence of sunlight, that driving force behind nearly all surface ecology, has not created a sterile wasteland, but rather fostered the development of biological communities that operate according to entirely different principles, drawing their energy from sources that remain largely mysterious, even to those who have spent lifetimes studying the deep places. The foundation of all Underdark ecology rests upon the remarkable adaptability of fungi, those organisms that blur the line between plant and animal kingdom while belonging fully to neither. In the lightless chambers carved from living stone, vast forests of mushrooms spread across cavern floors in displays that rival the grandest surface woodlands in their scope and complexity. These fungal communities create their own weather patterns through the release of spores and moisture, generating microclimates that support countless other forms of life, adapted to the unique conditions they provide. The largest of the Underdark fungi achieve sizes that dwarf their surface counterparts, with some varieties growing to heights that rival mature trees while developing complex internal structures that serve many of the same functions as the root and branch systems of conventional forests. The caps of these giant mushrooms can span dozens of feet in diameter, creating sheltered spaces beneath them that provide habitat for smaller organisms, while their massive stems serve as vertical highways for creatures adapted to climbing through the three-dimensional landscape of the fungal groves. The diversity of fungal species found in different regions of the Underdark reflects the varied conditions that exist throughout the underground realm. In areas where geothermal activity keeps temperatures consistently warm, thermophilic fungi develop complex symbiotic relationships with heat-loving bacteria, creating biological communities that thrive in conditions that would be lethal to most surface organisms. These partnerships produce some of the Underdark's most spectacular displays of bioluminescence, as entire cavern systems glow with the ethereal light generated by these biological processes. The cooler regions of the Underdark support different fungal communities that have adapted to conserve energy and survive on minimal resources. These organisms often develop incredibly efficient nutrient cycling systems, breaking down organic matter with such thoroughness that virtually nothing is wasted in the process. The slow but steady decomposition carried out by these fungi creates soil conditions that can support other forms of plant life, including some varieties that have lost their dependence on photosynthesis. and instead derive their energy from the chemical processes occurring in the rich organic matrix beneath them. Water plays a crucial role in determining the character and distribution of Underdark plant communities. Areas near underground streams and lakes support lush growths of mosses and lichens that cover the stone walls in living carpets of subtle beauty. These organisms have developed remarkable abilities to absorb and retain moisture from the humid air that surrounds water sources, creating their own self-sustaining microenvironments that can persist even when water levels fluctuate dramatically due to seasonal changes or geological events. The lichens that decorate the walls of Underdark passages represent some of the realm's most successful organisms, combining the characteristics of both fungi and algae in partnerships that allow them to thrive in conditions too extreme for either organism alone. The fungal component provides structure and protection while absorbing minerals from the stone substrate, while the algal partner contributes organic compounds produced through chemosynthesis, a process that derives energy from chemical reactions rather than sunlight. Many Underdark lichens have evolved the ability to produce their own illumination through bioluminescent processes that create patterns of light and shadow across the stone surfaces they inhabit. These living murals shift and change over time as the lichen colonies grow and age, creating displays that combine biological function with aesthetic beauty. The light produced by these organisms is usually dim by surface standards, but in the absolute darkness of the deep places, even this gentle glow can serve as a beacon for creatures navigating through the maze of tunnels and chambers. The food webs that sustain life in the Underdark operate according to principles that differ dramatically from those governing surface ecosystems. In the absence of primary producers that derive energy directly from sunlight, the base of the food pyramid consists of organisms that break down organic matter imported from above, or derive energy from chemical processes occurring within the earth itself. Detritivores, creatures that feed on decaying organic material, play roles of crucial importance in Underdark ecology, processing the leaves, wood, and other plant matter that occasionally finds its way down from the surface world. The flow of organic matter from surface to Underdark occurs through a variety of pathways, some obvious and others surprisingly subtle. Heavy rains can wash significant quantities of plant debris down through cave entrances and natural shafts, providing periodic windfalls of nutrients that support population booms among the organisms capable of processing this material. Animals that fall into deep caverns or become lost in cave systems contribute their own organic matter to the underground food web, often supporting entire communities of scavengers and decomposers. Less obvious, but equally important, is the contribution made by the countless small arthropods and other creatures that migrate between surface and underground environments. Bats, in particular, serve as crucial links between the two worlds, feeding on surface insects during their nocturnal forays and depositing nutrient-rich guano in their Underdark roosts. This biological transport system moves enormous quantities of organic material from surface to underground ecosystems, supporting food webs of remarkable complexity in caves that might otherwise lack sufficient energy sources. The predators that occupy the upper levels of Underdark food webs have evolved hunting strategies that take advantage of the unique conditions found in the deep places. Many have developed enhanced sensory capabilities that allow them to navigate and hunt effectively in the absolute darkness that characterizes most of the underground realm. Echolocation, heat sensing, and vibration detection are common adaptations that allow these predators to locate prey with remarkable precision despite the absence of visual cues. The acoustic properties of Underdark environments play crucial roles in the hunting strategies of many predators and the defensive behaviors of their prey. Sound travels differently through stone-walled passages than it does in open surface environments, creating opportunities for sophisticated acoustic hunting techniques, while also providing prey species with early warning systems that can detect the approach of danger from considerable distances. The complex interactions between predator and prey in these acoustic environments have led to evolutionary arms races that have produced some of the Underdark's most specialized and remarkable creatures. Territory, establishment, and defense in the three-dimensional environment of the Underdark creates challenges and opportunities unknown in surface ecosystems. Creatures that can claim and defend vertical territories have access to resources distributed throughout multiple levels of cavern systems, while those restricted to horizontal movement must compete more intensely for the limited resources available at any single depth. This three-dimensional aspect of Underdark ecology has led to the evolution of complex territorial arrangements where different species may claim different vertical zones within the same general area. The seasonal cycles that drive so many surface ecological processes are largely absent in the deep places, where temperature and light conditions remain relatively constant throughout the year. This stability allows for the development of biological communities that can maintain consistent population levels and resource utilization patterns over long periods. But it also means that Underdark ecosystems may be less resilient to sudden changes or disruptions than their surface counterparts. The role of water in Underdark ecology extends far beyond its basic function as a necessary ingredient for life. The mineral content of underground water sources often determines which species can survive in particular areas, as many Underdark organisms have evolved specific requirements for trace elements that may be abundant in some water sources while entirely absent from others. The temperature of water sources also plays a crucial role, as some organisms require the stable temperatures provided by deep groundwater, while others depend on the thermal variations created by geothermal activity. The aquatic ecosystems found in Underdark lakes and rivers support forms of life that exist nowhere else in the natural world. Many of these organisms have lost pigmentation entirely, appearing ghostly white or translucent when viewed under artificial light. Others have developed enhanced sensory organs that allow them to navigate and feed in the perpetual darkness of their aquatic environment. The food webs in these underwater communities often depend heavily on organic matter that settles from above, creating a rain of nutrients that supports complex communities of filter feeders and bottom dwellers. The caves and passages that connect different areas of the Underdark serve as corridors for the movement of both organisms and nutrients throughout the underground ecosystem. These transportation networks allow for gene flow between otherwise isolated populations, while also facilitating the distribution of resources from areas where they are abundant to regions where they may be scarce. The maintenance of these biological corridors is essential for the long-term health and stability of Underdark ecosystems, as their disruption can lead to the isolation and eventual extinction of vulnerable populations. Among the most remarkable aspects of Underdark ecology are the symbiotic relationships that have evolved between different species as adaptations to the challenging conditions of the deep places. These partnerships often involve exchanges of nutrients, protection, or services that benefit both participants, while allowing them to survive in environments where neither could exist alone. Some of the most complex symbioses involve multiple species working together in intricate networks of mutual dependence that can span entire cavern systems. The bioluminescent organisms that provide much of the illumination in the deep places have developed into complex ecological communities centered around the production and utilization of biological light. These living light sources attract prey species that have evolved to feed on the organisms producing the illumination, while predators have adapted to hunt using the light produced by their prey as a targeting system. The result is a series of interconnected relationships where the production of light serves multiple functions in maintaining the ecological balance of the community. The soil ecosystems that develop in areas where organic matter accumulates represent some of the Underdark's most complex and productive biological communities. These soil systems often support remarkable diversity, with numerous species of bacteria, fungi, and small arthropods working together to process organic matter and cycle nutrients. The soil communities serve as the foundation for larger organisms, including the vast fungal forests that dominate many Underdark landscapes. The adaptation of surface species to Underdark conditions provides ongoing opportunities for evolutionary innovation and ecological complexity. Animals that become trapped in cave systems may survive long enough to establish breeding populations, and their descendants often show rapid evolutionary changes as they adapt to their new environment. These colonization events create opportunities for new predator-prey relationships and competitive interactions that can reshape entire ecological communities over relatively short time periods. The role of geological processes in shaping Underdark ecology cannot be understated. Volcanic activity, earthquakes, and the gradual shifting of rock formations can create or destroy habitats, redirect water flow, and open or close connections between different areas of the underground realm. These geological changes create a dynamic environment where ecological communities must constantly adapt to changing conditions, leading to high levels of evolutionary innovation and species diversity. The deep places harbor forms of life that challenge fundamental assumptions about the requirements for biological existence. In the most extreme environments, near volcanic vents, and in areas where chemical processes create conditions hostile to most forms of life, specialized organisms have evolved that derive energy from sources that would be toxic to surface life. These extremophile communities represent some of the most ancient forms of life on the planet, providing glimpses into the biological processes that may have dominated the early history of life on Earth. As we contemplate these intricate webs of life that flourish in the eternal darkness, we begin to understand that the absence of sunlight has not created biological poverty, but rather biological innovation on a scale that rivals the most productive surface ecosystems. The patient work of countless generations has created a living tapestry woven from threads of interdependence and adaptation, where every organism plays its role in maintaining the delicate balance that allows life to thrive in places where life should not be possible. In these hidden gardens of the deep places, evolution has written poetry in living flesh, creating beauty that exists for its own sake in chambers where no eye has ever gazed and no voice has ever spoken of the wonders that dwell in the heart of darkness itself. The great migrations that brought the founding peoples of the Underdark from the world above were not single events, but rather waves of movement that occurred across millennia, each driven by its own unique combination of necessity, ambition, and catastrophe. These journeys into the depths represent some of the most profound transformations in the history of intelligent life, as entire civilizations abandoned the familiar rhythms of surface existence to embrace the alien challenges of a world where darkness reigned eternal and the very concept of sky became a half-remembered dream. The first of these great migrations occurred in ages so remote that their details have been lost to all but the most ancient chronicles, written in scripts that few living beings can still decipher. These earliest refugees were fleeing catastrophes of such magnitude that the surface world itself had become uninhabitable for their kind. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years at a time, ice ages that locked entire continents in perpetual winter, and magical disasters that warped the very fabric of reality, drove these desperate peoples ever deeper into the earth, in search of sanctuary that could not be found in the world above. The deepest archaeological evidence suggests that these first underground settlers possessed technologies and magical knowledge that surpassed anything known in later ages. The ruins of their cities, found in the most remote corners of the lower Dark, show architectural techniques that seem to defy physical laws and incorporate materials that cannot be identified by modern analysis. These mysterious builders left behind structures that have endured for tens of thousands of years without showing signs of decay, suggesting that they possessed secrets of construction and preservation that died with their civilization. The fate of these earliest inhabitants remains one of the Underdark's greatest mysteries. Whether they transcended physical existence through magical means, departed for other planes of reality, or simply faded away as their numbers dwindled over the long ages, their legacy can still be felt in the deepest places where their ruins serve as silent monuments to achievements that may never be equaled. The magical radiations that characterize much of the deep realm may themselves be remnants of the great works these ancient peoples performed in their desperate attempts to create a new form of existence in the depths of the earth. The migration that would have the most lasting impact on the character of the Underdark began with a conflict that tore apart one of the surface world's most advanced civilizations. The elves, those immortal children of starlight and growing things, found themselves divided by philosophical differences that eventually erupted into open warfare between factions that held irreconcilable views about the proper relationship between civilization and the natural world. The conflict that resulted from this division was not merely a political struggle, but a fundamental disagreement about the nature of existence itself. The faction that would eventually become the Drow had embraced forms of magic and philosophy that their surface-dwelling kin found abhorrent. Their experimentation with necromancy, demonology, and other forbidden arts represented not merely academic pursuits, but a conscious rejection of the traditional elven reverence for life and natural beauty. As their practices became more extreme and their magical researches delved ever deeper into realms that conventional wisdom considered too dangerous to explore, the tensions within elven society approached the breaking point. The war that followed was unlike any conflict the world had ever seen, fought not merely with conventional weapons, but with magical forces that reshaped the very landscape where the battles occurred. Entire forests were transformed into twisted mockeries of their former beauty as the competing magics warped everything they touched. Cities that had stood for millennia were reduced to crystalline slag by spells that exceeded any destructive power previously imagined. The very air became poison in some regions, as magical energies accumulated beyond any possibility of natural dissipation. The final battle of this conflict occurred at a site that has since become legendary in the histories of both surface and underground peoples. The magical forces unleashed in this ultimate confrontation created distortions in reality that can still be detected by sensitive instruments thousands of years later. The faction that would become the Drow found themselves overwhelmed not by superior military force, but by the intervention of divine powers who had grown horrified by the corruption that their magical experiments had introduced into the day world. The punishment that followed was swift and absolute. The defeated elves found themselves transformed by the same divine magic that had brought about their defeat, their pale skin darkened to match the corruption that had claimed their souls. Their sensitivity to light reversed, so that the sun they had once loved became a source of agony. Most devastating of all, they were banished from the surface world entirely, condemned to exist only in the depths where their transformed nature would not corrupt the clean light of day. The journey into the depths that followed this divine condemnation was a migration unlike any other in recorded history. Entire populations of these newly transformed beings moved through cave systems and natural shafts, carrying with them the remnants of their sophisticated civilization while adapting to the alien conditions of their new environment. The cultural shock of this transition cannot be overstated, as beings who had lived their entire existence surrounded by growing things and open skies found themselves confined to spaces carved from living rock. The early years of drow existence in the Underdark were marked by struggles that tested their resilience and adaptability to the absolute limit. The magical knowledge that had made them formidable opponents on the surface required adaptation to function in environments where familiar magical laws operated differently or not at all. The social structures that had governed their surface society proved inadequate for the challenges of underground existence, forcing them to develop new forms of organization that could cope with the unique dangers and opportunities of their subterranean domain. The relationship between the newly arrived drow and the creatures already inhabiting the Underdark was complex and often violent. Some of the underground peoples welcomed the sophisticated newcomers as potential allies or trading partners, while others saw them as invaders who threatened to upset the delicate balances that had allowed life to flourish in the depths. The drow themselves, bitter from their defeat and exile, often approached these encounters with hostility born of desperation and wounded pride. The establishment of the first drow settlements required overcoming challenges that their surface-dwelling ancestors had never faced. The construction of cities in three-dimensional cave systems demanded architectural innovations that drew upon both their inherited magical knowledge and hard-won practical experience with underground conditions. The development of agriculture, based on fungal cultivation rather than traditional plant growth, required generations of experimentation and adaptation to achieve reliable food production. The evolution of drow society from its surface origins into its distinctly underground form was influenced by the unique conditions of their new environment and the psychological impact of their exile and transformation. The hierarchical structures that had characterized their surface civilization became even more rigid and ruthless as they adapted to an environment where weakness could mean death not just for individuals but for entire communities. The martial traditions that had served them during their conflicts with other surface peoples evolved into the complex warrior culture that would make them formidable opponents to any who challenged their dominance in the depths. The religious transformation of the drow represented perhaps the most profound aspect of their adaptation to underground existence. The nature worship that had characterized their surface spirituality was replaced by devotion to deities who embodied the darkness, treachery, and ruthless pragmatism necessary for survival in the depths. The rise of Lolth, the Spider Queen, as their primary deity reflected both their new environment and their transformed psychology, as her teachings of cunning, betrayal, and the pursuit of power through any means necessary became the philosophical foundation for their new civilization. Parallel to the Great Drow Migration, though occurring over a much longer time period, was the gradual movement of dwarven populations from surface mountain strongholds into the depths beneath. This migration was driven not by defeat and exile, but by the inexorable pull of the earth itself, as generations of miners and craftsmen found themselves drawn ever deeper in pursuit of the rare metals and gems that could only be found in the planet's interior. What began as extended mining expeditions gradually evolved into permanent settlements as entire communities discovered that the wealth and security they sought could only be achieved by embracing life in the depths. The Duergar, those dwarves who would eventually become the Grey Dwarves of the Underdark, represent the culmination of this long process of adaptation and transformation. Unlike the Drow, whose change was sudden and imposed by external forces, the evolution of the Duergar occurred gradually over countless generations as their communities became increasingly isolated from their surface kin. The physical and cultural changes that marked this transformation were subtle at first, becoming more pronounced as the centuries passed, and the connections to the surface world grew ever more tenuous. The early stages of this transformation were driven primarily by practical considerations, rather than any conscious desire to abandon surface existence. The mining operations that drew these dwarven communities ever deeper required increasingly sophisticated techniques and equipment as they pursued ore veins that led far beneath the familiar territories of their mountain homes. The establishment of permanent underground facilities to support these operations was initially seen as a temporary measure, but the convenience and security of underground living gradually made these settlements more attractive than the surface communities they were meant to support. The social structures that developed in these deep mining communities reflected both their dwarven heritage and the unique challenges of underground existence. The traditional dwarven values of craftsmanship, clan loyalty, and respect for tradition remained strong, but they were adapted to serve the needs of communities that existed in almost complete isolation from the outside world. The role of the master craftsman became even more important in these underground settlements, as the ability to create and maintain the tools and weapons necessary for survival could mean the difference between prosperity and extinction. The gradual exposure to the magical radiations that permeated the deeper regions of the earth began to have subtle effects on these underground dwarven communities. The changes were so gradual that they were barely noticed by those experiencing them, but over the course of generations, they accumulated into significant physical and psychological transformations. The robust constitutions that had made surface dwarves such hardy survivors were enhanced by adaptation to the challenging conditions of the depths, while their natural resistance to magic was strengthened by constant exposure to the ambient magical energies of the underground realm. The psychological changes that accompanied this physical transformation were equally significant. The isolation of underground existence, combined with the constant dangers and challenges of life in the depths, fostered the development of a more paranoid and suspicious mindset than had characterized their surface ancestors. The cooperative traditions that had allowed surface dwarven communities to thrive were replaced by more individualistic and competitive social structures that reflected the harsh realities of underground survival. The religious practices of these underground dwarven communities also evolved in response to their changed circumstances. The worship of mountain gods and deities associated with craftsmanship and mining remained important, but new spiritual traditions developed that reflected the unique experiences of life in the depths. The reverence for stone and metal that had always characterized dwarven spirituality took on new dimensions, as these communities discovered forms of both that existed nowhere on the surface and possessed properties that seemed almost supernatural. The deep gnomes, known as Svirfneblin, represent another major migration into the Underdark, though their journey was motivated by factors quite different from those that drove either the Drow or the Duergar into the depths. These small, hardy people were refugees from conflicts on the surface, but their exile was largely self-imposed as they sought sanctuary from wars and persecution that threatened to destroy their peaceful communities. Their migration into the depths was not a conquest or an expansion, but a retreat into environments where their natural abilities would allow them to survive and eventually thrive. The gnomish affinity for earth magic and their natural ability to work stone made them ideally suited for life in the rocky caverns and passages of the Underdark. Unlike the other major migrant peoples, the Svirfneblin adapted to underground existence without losing their fundamental optimism and curiosity about the world around them. Their transformation from surface gnomes to deep gnomes was primarily one of degree rather than kind, as they developed enhanced versions of abilities they had already possessed rather than acquiring entirely new characteristics. The settlements that the Svirfneblin established in the depths reflected their practical nature and their desire to create communities that could exist in harmony with their underground environment rather than dominating it. Their cities were marvels of engineering that seemed to grow organically from the stone itself, with passages and chambers that followed the natural grain of the rock rather than imposing artificial geometric patterns upon it. The defensive capabilities of these settlements were legendary, as the Sverfneblin's mastery of stone allowed them to create fortifications that could withstand even the most determined assaults. The cultural traditions that the Sverfneblin brought with them into the depths proved remarkably adaptable to their new environment. Their emphasis on craftsmanship and artistic expression found new outlets in the unique materials and conditions of the underground realm, while their traditional storytelling and music evolved to incorporate themes and melodies that reflected the acoustic properties of stone-walled chambers and passages. The preservation of their cultural identity while adapting to radically different living conditions represents one of the most successful integration stories in the history of Underdark settlement. The migration patterns that brought other peoples into the depths were more complex and varied, representing individual communities or small groups, rather than the massive population movements that characterized the major migrations. These smaller migrations were often driven by specific circumstances such as natural disasters, political persecution, or the simple desire to escape the conflicts and complications of surface existence. The diversity of these smaller migrant groups contributed significantly to the cultural richness and complexity that would come to characterize Underdark civilization. Some of these minor migrations were led by visionaries who saw opportunities in the depths that were not available on the surface, ambitious rulers seeking to establish kingdoms beyond the reach of their enemies, religious leaders pursuing spiritual revelations that could only be found in the eternal darkness, and scholars drawn by the promise of ancient knowledge hidden in the deepest places, all contributed their own unique elements to the developing tapestry of underground civilization. The process of adaptation that all these migrant peoples underwent was not merely physical, but involved fundamental changes in their understanding of space, time, and social organization. The three-dimensional nature of underground travel and settlement required new concepts of territory and boundary that had no equivalent in surface societies. The absence of natural cycles of day and night forced the development of new ways of organizing time and activity that could function in an environment of perpetual darkness. The interaction between the various migrant peoples created opportunities for cultural exchange and innovation that would have been impossible if each group had remained isolated in its own region. The trade networks that developed to move resources between different underground communities also served as conduits for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions that enriched all the participating cultures. The hybrid societies that emerged from these interactions often combined the best features of their constituent traditions while developing entirely new characteristics that reflected their unique circumstances. The challenges faced by all these migrant peoples in adapting to underground existence created bonds of shared experience that transcended traditional ethnic and cultural boundaries. The common struggles against cave-ins, flooding, toxic gases, and hostile creatures fostered the development of mutual aid traditions that allowed communities to survive disasters that might have destroyed them if they had remained completely isolated. The accumulated knowledge of underground survival techniques became a shared resource that was preserved and passed down through generations of inhabitants. As these various peoples established themselves in the depths and their settlements grew into cities and eventually kingdoms, the character of the Underdark was fundamentally shaped by their diverse traditions and perspectives. The realm that emerged from these great migrations was not simply a darker version of surface civilization, but something entirely new, combining elements from many different cultural traditions while developing its own unique characteristics in response to the alien conditions of underground existence. The legacy of these ancient migrations continues to influence the development of Underdark civilization, as the descendants of the original settlers carry forward the accumulated wisdom and traditions of countless generations while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The cultural diversity that resulted from these varied migrations remains one of the Underdark's greatest strengths, providing resources of knowledge and experience that allow its inhabitants to survive and thrive in conditions that would defeat any single cultural tradition. In the depths where darkness reigns eternal, the light of human creativity and adaptability burns as brightly as it ever did in the world above, testament to the remarkable resilience of intelligent life in the face of even the most extreme challenges. The rise of the great civilizations that would come to dominate the Middle Dark represents one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of intelligent life, as disparate peoples scattered across vast underground territories gradually coalesced into organized societies capable of wielding power on a scale that rivaled the greatest surface empires. These emerging powers transformed the character of the Underdark from a collection of isolated refugee settlements into a complex political landscape where ambitious rulers competed for control of resources, territory, and the allegiance of lesser communities scattered throughout the labyrinthine passages of the Deep Realm. The ascendancy of the Drow city-states marked the beginning of a new era in Underdark history, as these descendants of exiled surface elves applied their sophisticated understanding of magic, politics, and warfare to the conquest and organization of vast underground territories. The transformation from desperate refugees to imperial masters was not accomplished overnight, but required centuries of careful planning, ruthless determination, and the gradual accumulation of power through conquest, diplomacy, and the establishment of trade networks that extended throughout the known regions of the underground realm. Menzoberranzan, the greatest of the Drow cities, exemplifies the heights of achievement possible when centuries of accumulated knowledge and resources are focused on the creation of a single magnificent urban center, built within a vast natural cavern that stretches for miles in every direction. The city represents a masterwork of three-dimensional architecture that takes full advantage of the unique possibilities offered by underground construction. The great noble houses that govern the city have carved their compounds into the walls of the cavern itself, creating vertical neighborhoods that rise through multiple levels while maintaining the defensive advantages that come from being literally embedded in solid stone. The architecture of Menzoberranzan reflects both the sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities inherited from surface elven civilization and the practical requirements of life in a hostile underground environment. The graceful spires and flowing curves that characterize Drow construction are not merely decorative, but serve important structural and defensive functions, distributing weight and stress in ways that allow for the construction of buildings that seem to defy the laws of physics while providing maximum protection against both natural disasters and enemy assault. The magical infrastructure that supports daily life in Menzoberranzan represents innovations that have no equivalent in surface cities, drawing upon the unique properties of Fersres radiation and other underground magical phenomena to power systems that would be impossible to maintain in any other environment. The perpetual illumination that allows the city to function without conventional light sources is maintained through a complex network of magical devices that convert ambient magical energy into the soft, purple radiance that has become synonymous with Drow civilization. The political structure that governs Menzoberranzan reflects the complex interplay of traditional Drow values, practical necessities, and the religious teachings of Lolth, the Spider Queen, whose influence permeates every aspect of the city's social organization. The great matriarchal houses that compete for dominance within the city represent sophisticated political entities that combine the characteristics of noble families, military organizations, religious institutions, and commercial enterprises into single unified structures, capable of operating effectively in multiple spheres simultaneously. The competition between these great houses serves as the driving force behind much of the innovation and achievement that has made Menzoberranzan the most powerful city in the Underdark. The constant pressure to outmaneuver rivals in politics, commerce, and warfare has fostered the development of new magical techniques, military technologies, and organizational methods that have given the Drow significant advantages over their underground competitors. The culture of controlled conflict that characterizes inter-house relations ensures that the city's leadership remains sharp and adaptive, while preventing any single faction from gaining enough power to eliminate all opposition. The military forces that serve the great houses of Menzoberranzan represent some of the most formidable fighting forces in the known world, combining the natural advantages of Drow physiology with weapons and tactics specifically designed for underground warfare. The Dark Elves' natural affinity for magic has been enhanced through centuries of focused development, creating warrior mages capable of combining spellcasting with conventional combat techniques in ways that make them devastatingly effective opponents in the confined spaces and unusual tactical situations that characterize underground battles. The economic foundation that supports Menzoberranzan's political and military power rests upon control of trade routes that extend throughout the Underdark and even reach to the surface world through carefully maintained commercial relationships with certain surface communities. The Drow have become master traders who understand that economic dominance can be more effective than military conquest in securing long-term control over rival communities. Their merchant enterprises combine legitimate commerce with intelligence gathering, political manipulation, and when necessary, targeted violence to maintain their competitive advantages. The religious institutions that serve Lolth within Menzoberranzan represent one of the most powerful forces shaping the city's character and policies. The priestesses who interpret the Spider Queen's will exercise influence that extends far beyond the purely spiritual realm, serving as advisors to the great houses, mediators in inter-house disputes, and the ultimate arbiters of what constitutes acceptable behavior within Drow society. The temples dedicated to Lolth serve not only as centers of worship, but as training facilities for the priestesses, libraries for the preservation of religious knowledge, and coordination centers for the various activities that serve the Spider Queen's greater purposes. The influence of Lolth on Drow society extends beyond mere religious observance to encompass fundamental aspects of social organization, political theory, and personal ethics. The Spider Queen's teachings emphasize cunning over strength, patience over haste, and the careful cultivation of power through the manipulation of others rather than through direct confrontation. These principles have shaped Drow culture in ways that make them particularly well-suited for the complex political environment of the Underdark, where survival often depends more on one's ability to navigate webs of alliance and enmity than on simple military prowess. The educational systems that prepare young Drow for adult roles in their society reflect the sophisticated understanding of statecraft, military science, and magical theory that has made their civilization so successful. The great houses maintain their own training facilities where their members learn not only the practical skills necessary for survival in the Underdark, but also the theoretical knowledge required for leadership roles in politics, commerce, and warfare. The competition for positions within these educational institutions serves as preparation for the competitive environment that characterizes adult Drow society. Beyond Menzoberranzan, numerous other Drow city-states have established themselves throughout the Middle Dark, each adapting the basic principles of Drow civilization to local conditions, while maintaining the cultural unity that allows them to cooperate when faced with external threats. These secondary cities serve various specialized functions within the broader Drow Empire, some focusing on particular industries or military specializations, others serving as frontier outposts that extend Drow influence into previously unexplored regions of the Underdark. The Duergar kingdoms that compete with the Drow for dominance in the Middle Dark represent a very different approach to underground civilization, one that emphasizes industrial development and technological innovation over magical sophistication and political subtlety. The Grey Dwarves have built their power upon their unmatched ability to extract and process the mineral wealth that lies buried in the deepest places, creating an economic foundation that allows them to field military forces equipped with weapons and armor of legendary quality. The great forges that serve as the hearts of Duergar civilization represent technological achievements that surpass anything known on the surface world, capable of working with materials and techniques that remain largely mysterious even to the Duergar themselves. The master smiths who oversee these industrial operations have elevated metalworking from a craft to an art form, creating items that combine practical utility with aesthetic beauty, while incorporating magical properties that enhance their effectiveness, far beyond what conventional smithing could achieve. The social organization of Duergar society reflects their focus on collective achievement and industrial efficiency rather than the individualistic competition that characterizes Drow civilization. The clan structures that govern Duergar communities emphasize cooperation and shared responsibility in ways that allow for the coordination of large-scale industrial projects while maintaining the personal loyalty and group identity that provides psychological support for individuals living in the challenging conditions of the deep places. The military traditions of the Duergar reflect their industrial capabilities and their cultural emphasis on disciplined cooperation rather than individual heroics. Their armies are equipped with standardized weapons and armor that represent the pinnacle of underground metallurgy, while their tactical doctrines emphasize coordinated group movements and the efficient use of superior equipment, rather than the magical innovations and individual prowess that characterize Drow military methods. The territorial holdings of the major Duergar kingdoms often center around particularly rich mineral deposits or strategic locations that control important transportation routes through the Underdark. The fortifications that protect these holdings represent marvels of defensive engineering, with walls and gates that incorporate the latest developments in both conventional construction techniques and magical enhancement. The siege warfare capabilities of the Duergar are legendary throughout the Underdark, as their engineers have developed specialized equipment and techniques for both conducting and withstanding prolonged sieges in underground environments. The Mind Flayer colonies that represent the third major power center in the Middle Dark operate according to principles so alien to conventional understanding that their true nature remains largely mysterious even to those who have studied them extensively. The Illithid approach to civilization emphasizes collective consciousness and the subordination of individual identity to group purposes in ways that create social organizations of tremendous efficiency and coordination, but little recognizable humanity. The cities that serve as centers of Mind Flayer power are architectural marvels that seem to grow organically from the living rock, with passages and chambers that follow patterns that appear random to conventional perception, but serve purposes that become clear only when viewed from the perspective of collective rather than individual consciousness. The bioarchitectural techniques employed by the Illithids allow them to create structures that are simultaneously functional and alive, capable of growth, adaptation, and self-repair in ways that conventional construction cannot match. The economic systems that support Mind Flayer civilization operate largely outside the conventional frameworks of trade and commerce, relying instead on the systematic exploitation of enslaved populations and the careful management of biological resources to meet the specialized nutritional requirements of illithid physiology. The brain consumption that sustains mind flayer life represents not merely a dietary necessity, but a form of resource management that requires sophisticated planning and organization to maintain sustainable populations of suitable prey. Species. The military forces, commanded by mind flayer colonies, consist primarily of dominated thralls whose loyalty has been ensured through psychic manipulation rather than conventional forms of military discipline. These enslaved armies can be coordinated with precision that exceeds anything possible with conventional command structures, as the collective consciousness of their mind, Flayer Masters, allows for instantaneous communication and coordination across entire military formations. The scientific and magical research conducted within mind flayer colonies focuses primarily on the study of consciousness, mental manipulation, and the biological processes that support intelligent life. The knowledge accumulated through these investigations has given the illithids capabilities that seem almost godlike to other species, including the ability to fundamentally alter the thoughts and memories of their subjects and to manipulate biological processes in ways that can transform one species into another entirely. The aboleth dominions that control the deepest waters of the Underdark represent perhaps the most ancient and mysterious of the major power centers in the Middle Dark. These aquatic entities possess memories that extend back to the earliest epochs of planetary history, giving them perspectives on current events that encompass timescales beyond the comprehension of shorter-lived species. Their underwater cities represent achievements in aquatic architecture that have no equivalent in any terrestrial civilization, with structures that incorporate living coral, shaped stone, and bioengineered organisms into unified architectural systems. The social organization of aboleth society reflects their extreme longevity and their collective memory of historical events stretching back millions of years. The individual entities that make up aboleth civilization serve roles that are determined not by personal ambition or aptitude, but by their position within the vast historical narrative that defines their species' understanding of reality. This historical perspective gives the aboleths strategic patience that allows them to pursue goals across timescales that would encompass dozens of generations of shorter-lived species. The beholder layers that dot the landscape of the Middle Dark represent a different form of civilization entirely, one based upon the paranoid delusions and megalomaniacal ambitions of individual tyrants, rather than any form of cooperative social organization. Each beholder creates its own domain according to its personal vision of perfect order, resulting in territories that reflect the peculiar psychology of their individual rulers, while serving as bases for the projection of power throughout the surrounding regions. The architectural styles employed in beholder layers tend to be highly idiosyncratic, reflecting the personal aesthetic preferences and defensive paranoia of their creators rather than any standardized building traditions. The magical defenses that protect these installations represent some of the most sophisticated and unpredictable security systems in the Underdark, as each beholder incorporates its own unique combination of spell effects, mechanical traps, and dominated guardians to create defensive networks that are almost impossible for outsiders to predict or counter. The economic activities that support beholder civilization consist primarily of tribute collection from subordinate communities and the systematic looting of weaker neighbors, rather than any form of productive industry. The psychological makeup of beholders makes them unsuited for the cooperative activities that characterize most forms of civilized life, but their individual power and cunning make them formidable opponents who can dominate large territories through fear and the occasional demonstration of overwhelming force. As these great powers established themselves throughout the Middle Dark and extended their influence into the surrounding regions, The political landscape of the Underdark became increasingly complex and dangerous. The competition between these major civilizations created opportunities for smaller communities to advance their own interests by choosing sides carefully or remaining neutral while profiting from the conflicts of their more powerful neighbors. The constant state of tension and potential warfare that characterizes intercivilizational relations has fostered innovations in military technology, diplomatic protocol, and intelligence gathering that have raised the general level of sophistication throughout the underground realm. The legacy of these great Middle Dark civilizations continues to shape the character of the Underdark, as their accumulated achievements in architecture, magic, technology, and social organization provide foundations upon which future developments can build. The knowledge and techniques developed by these ancient powers have spread throughout the underground realm through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, creating a shared foundation of civilization that unites the disparate peoples of the depths while allowing them to maintain their individual cultural identities. In the eternal darkness of the Middle Dark, the light of intelligence and creativity burns as brightly as it ever did in the surface world, testament to the remarkable adaptability and resilience of civilized life in even the most challenging environments. The creatures that have made the Underdark their permanent home represent forms of life so thoroughly adapted to the conditions of eternal darkness that they challenge every assumption about the requirements and possibilities of biological existence. These beings have evolved along pathways that diverged from surface life millions of years ago, developing characteristics that allow them not merely to survive but to thrive in environments that would prove instantly lethal to most creatures from the world above. Their alien natures reflect the fundamental differences between life that developed under open skies and life that emerged from the crushing depths of the planetary interior. The Mind Flayers stand as perhaps the most terrifying examples of how intelligence can develop along utterly inhuman lines when freed from the constraints that govern surface evolution. These creatures, known to scholars as illithids, possess mental capabilities that surpass those of most surface dwellers, while maintaining psychological frameworks so alien that meaningful communication between their species and others remains virtually impossible. Their very appearance seems designed to inspire revulsion and terror in humanoid observers, with their pale, tentacled faces serving as constant reminders of just how far removed they are from any recognizable form of life. The process of seromorphosis through which mind flayers reproduce represents one of the most horrifying biological phenomena known to exist anywhere in the natural world. The transformation of a humanoid host into an illithid involves the complete destruction of the original personality and consciousness, replaced by an alien intelligence that retains the host's memories while serving the collective needs of the Mind Flayer colony. This process of mental death and alien rebirth challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of individual identity and consciousness, suggesting possibilities for the manipulation of sentient life that border on the supernatural. The tadpole stage that precedes full seromorphosis reveals the Mind Flayer's reproductive strategy as one designed to ensure the absolute dominance of illithid consciousness over any competing forms of intelligence. These parasitic larvae consume the host's brain tissue while gradually replacing it with alien neural structures that operate according to principles entirely different from those governing normal humanoid thought processes. The resulting creatures retain the physical capabilities of their original forms, while serving the collective consciousness of their illithid masters with absolute loyalty and dedication. The collective intelligence that emerges from Mind Flayer colonies represents a form of consciousness that transcends individual awareness, while maintaining the problem-solving capabilities necessary for complex technological and magical development. This hive mind structure allows for coordination and planning on scales that individual intelligences cannot match, enabling mind flayer communities to pursue long-term goals that may require centuries or millennia to achieve. The patient malevolence that characterizes illicit activities reflects this collective perspective, as individual mind flayers serve roles within larger plans whose ultimate purposes may be incomprehensible to outside observers. The magical abilities that mind flayers wield represent applications of mental energy that go far beyond conventional spellcasting to encompass direct manipulation of consciousness itself. Their capacity to dominate the minds of other creatures, to extract memories and knowledge through psychic contact, and to communicate telepathically across vast distances makes them uniquely suited for the complex political environment of the Underdark. These abilities also make them incredibly dangerous opponents, as they can turn enemies into allies through mental manipulation, while gathering intelligence through methods that leave no physical evidence. The cities that mind flayers construct reflect their collective consciousness and their alien aesthetic sensibilities, with architecture that seems to grow organically from the living rock, while serving purposes that remain largely mysterious to outside observers. The bioarchitectural techniques employed by illithids allow them to create structures that are simultaneously functional and alive, capable of responding to changing conditions, while maintaining the complex internal environments necessary for their specialized reproductive and research activities. Hook horrors represent a very different approach to Underdark adaptation, having evolved into specialized predators perfectly suited for the three-dimensional environment of cavern systems and tunnel networks. These creatures combine the characteristics of both climbing and flying animals while maintaining the size and strength necessary to serve as apex predators in their underground domains. Their distinctive hooked claws allow them to navigate the vertical surfaces that characterize much of the Underdark landscape, while their keen senses and patient hunting strategies make them formidable opponents for any creature unfortunate enough to enter their territory. The echolocation abilities that hook horrors employ for navigation and hunting represent sophisticated biological sonar systems that rival or exceed the capabilities of their surface-dwelling counterparts. These creatures can construct detailed mental maps of their surroundings through sound alone, allowing them to hunt effectively, even in the absolute darkness that characterizes the deepest regions of the Underdark. Their vocalizations range from subsonic calls that can travel for miles through stone passages, to ultrasonic clicks that provide detailed information about nearby objects and creatures. The social behaviors of hook horrors reflect the challenges of maintaining territorial boundaries in the three-dimensional environment of the Underdark, where traditional concepts of territory must be adapted to account for vertical as well as horizontal space. Individual hook horrors or mated pairs typically claim territories that encompass multiple levels of cavern systems, with hunting grounds that may extend through dozens of interconnected chambers and passages. The acoustic signals they use to mark and defend these territories create complex soundscapes that serve as communication networks for creatures capable of interpreting their meanings. The hunting strategies employed by hook horrors take full advantage of their mobility and acoustic capabilities, allowing them to track prey across vast distances through underground passage systems while remaining virtually undetectable until the moment of attack. These creatures are capable of moving through their territories with remarkable speed and silence, using their hooked claws to swing from projection to projection while maintaining constant awareness of potential prey through their echolocation abilities. Cloakers represent perhaps the most deceptive and psychologically disturbing of the Underdark's native predators, having evolved forms and behaviors specifically designed to exploit the fears and assumptions of intelligent prey species. These creatures combine physical adaptations that allow them to mimic inanimate objects with psychological abilities that can manipulate the perceptions and emotions of their victims. The result is a predator that attacks not only the body but also the mind, creating terror and confusion that make effective resistance virtually impossible. The physical structure of cloakers allows them to flatten themselves against stone surfaces in ways that make them virtually indistinguishable from hanging cloth or leather, a camouflage ability that proves devastatingly effective in environments where travelers often encounter abandoned equipment and mysterious objects. Their capacity to remain motionless for extended periods, while monitoring their surroundings for potential prey, demonstrates patience and dedication to their hunting strategy that few other predators can match. The illusion-creating abilities that cloakers possess represent sophisticated applications of both magical and psychological manipulation techniques. These creatures can project false images and sounds that play upon the fears and expectations of their victims, creating scenarios that seem entirely real until the moment when the cloaker reveals its true nature. The psychological impact of these illusions often proves as devastating as any physical attack, as victims find themselves unable to trust their own perceptions even after escaping from immediate danger. The mournful sounds that cloakers produce as part of their hunting strategy tap into primal fears that exist at the deepest levels of intelligent consciousness, creating emotional responses that bypass rational thought and trigger fight or flight reactions. These vocalizations seem to resonate at frequencies that create physical discomfort while carrying emotional undertones that suggest loss, abandonment, and impending doom. The effect is to create a state of psychological vulnerability that makes victims more susceptible to the cloaker's other forms of manipulation. Basilisks represent the ultimate expression of Underdark evolution's capacity for creating creatures that weaponize basic sensory experiences, transforming the simple act of sight into a deadly encounter with supernatural forces. These reptilian predators combine the physical capabilities of powerful hunters with magical abilities that can instantly neutralize any threat through petrification, creating a defense mechanism so effective that few creatures dare to challenge them directly. The petrifying gaze that serves as the basilisk's primary weapon represents a form of magical ability that operates through mechanisms that remain poorly understood even by the most learned scholars. The transformation of living tissue into stone appears to occur at the molecular level, suggesting interactions between magical energy and biological processes that transcend conventional understanding of both magic and biology. The speed at which this transformation occurs makes it virtually impossible for victims to take countermeasures once direct eye contact has been established. The hunting behaviors of basilisks reflect their reliance on their petrifying gaze as both weapon and defense mechanism, with strategies that emphasize patience and positioning over active pursuit of prey. These creatures typically establish territories around reliable sources of food and water, then wait for potential victims to approach within range of their deadly gaze. The stone statues that accumulate around basilisk lairs serve both as warnings to potential intruders and as monuments to the creature's hunting success. The psychological impact of basilisk encounters extends far beyond the immediate threat of petrification to encompass fundamental changes in how survivors perceive and interact with their environment. The knowledge that a single moment of careless observation can result in instant death creates levels of paranoia and caution that can persist for years after the initial encounter, affecting everything from exploration patterns to social interactions within underground communities. Ropers represent another category of Underdark predator that has evolved to exploit the unique characteristics of cave environments using camouflage and deception to appear as harmless rock formations, while possessing the ability to strike at prey from distances that seem impossible given their apparent immobility. These creatures combine the patience of ambush predators with the striking range of creatures designed for active hunting, creating a combination of characteristics that makes them uniquely suited for cave environments where cover is abundant and escape routes are limited. The strangling tendrils that ropers use to capture and subdue their prey represent specialized appendages that combine tremendous strength with remarkable sensitivity, allowing these creatures to gauge the condition and capabilities of their victims while gradually tightening their grip. The length and flexibility of these tendrils give ropers effective hunting ranges that can encompass entire chambers, making it difficult for potential prey to identify safe zones within their territory. The mimicry abilities that allow ropers to blend seamlessly with natural rock formations represent evolutionary adaptations that go far beyond simple camouflage to encompass actual structural modifications that alter their apparent texture, coloration, and even temperature to match their surroundings. These adaptations are so complete that even experienced Underdark travelers may pass within feet of a roper without detecting its presence, making these creatures among the most successful ambush predators in the underground realm. Dark mantles represent aerial predators that have adapted to the unique characteristics of cavern environments, developing abilities that allow them to hunt effectively in the three-dimensional space above cave floors, while remaining virtually undetectable until the moment of attack. These creatures combine the mobility of flying predators with camouflage abilities that rival those of the most sophisticated ambush hunters, creating a combination that proves devastating to ground-based prey species. The smothering attacks that dark mantles employ represent a hunting strategy perfectly adapted to environments where prey species may possess sophisticated defensive capabilities that require specialized counters. By enveloping their victims completely, dark mantles neutralize most forms of weapon-based defense, while simultaneously cutting off air supplies and blocking vision, creating conditions where even powerful opponents find themselves at severe disadvantages. Grimlocks represent the ultimate example of how intelligent species can adapt to Underdark conditions through the loss of capabilities that prove unnecessary or even counterproductive in underground environments. These descendants of surface-dwelling humanoids have evolved beyond their need for vision, developing enhanced senses of hearing and smell that provide more reliable information in cave environments than sight ever could. The social structures that Grimlocks have developed reflect their adaptation to group survival in hostile underground environments, with tribal organizations that emphasize collective hunting, shared defense responsibilities, and the efficient distribution of resources within communities that may number in the hundreds. The oral traditions that preserve Grimlock cultural knowledge serve not only as entertainment, but as crucial survival information that ensures the continuation of hard-won knowledge about Underdark navigation, hunting techniques, and threat recognition. The territorial behaviors of Grimlock tribes reflect their need to control sufficient resources to support their communities, while maintaining defensive positions that can be held against the various threats that characterize Underdark environments. The complex network of alliances and rivalries that exists between different Grimlock tribes creates political situations that can shift rapidly as circumstances change, requiring constant diplomatic attention to maintain the relationships necessary for long-term survival. The religious practices that have developed within Grimlock communities often center around the worship of entities associated with stone, darkness, and the deep places of the earth, reflecting their complete adaptation to underground existence while maintaining spiritual connections that provide psychological support for the challenges of their harsh environment. These religious traditions often incorporate practical knowledge about cave navigation, threat recognition, and resource management into their ritual practices, ensuring that crucial survival information is preserved and transmitted through cultural mechanisms that transcend individual lifespans. Purple worms represent perhaps the most impressive examples of how life can adapt to the extreme conditions found in the deepest regions of the Underdark, growing to sizes that challenge the physical limits of what seems possible for living creatures, while maintaining the mobility and strength necessary to tunnel through solid stone in pursuit of food and territory. These massive creatures serve as both creators and destroyers of Underdark geography, carving new passages through their constant movement, while occasionally devastating established communities through their mindless passage. The burrowing capabilities that purple worms possess allow them to move through stone as easily as surface creatures move through water, creating tunnel networks that serve as highways for smaller creatures, while reshaping the underground landscape on scales that can affect entire regions. The acidic secretions that these creatures produce to aid in their tunneling activities create chemical environments that support unique forms of bacterial and fungal life, leading to the development of specialized ecosystems within the passages they create. The feeding behaviors of purple worms reflect their role as ultimate predators in the deepest regions of the Underdark, with appetites that can consume virtually any form of organic matter they encounter, while requiring constant movement to locate sufficient food sources to sustain their massive bodies. The vibrations created by their passage through stone can be detected at considerable distances, providing advance warning to communities in their path, while also serving as navigation aids for creatures familiar with their movement patterns. These denizens of the deep places represent the culmination of millions of years of evolution in environments that exist at the very limits of what can support complex life. Their alien characteristics serve as constant reminders that the Underdark operates according to biological and evolutionary principles that differ dramatically from those governing surface existence, creating forms of life that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature and possibilities of intelligent existence. In contemplating these creatures and their adaptations, we begin to understand that the darkness of the deep places has not limited life, but rather provided it with opportunities to explore possibilities that remain unknown in the world above, creating a menagerie of wonders that exists beyond the reach of sunlight in the eternal night of the realm below. The architecture of the Underdark represents humanity's most ambitious attempt to impose order and beauty upon landscapes that seem inherently hostile to conventional notions of civilized existence. In chambers carved from living stone and passages that twist through the planetary interior, like the arteries of some vast organism, the builders of the deep places have created urban environments that transcend the limitations of surface construction while embracing possibilities that exist nowhere else in the known world. These cities stand as monuments to the adaptability of intelligent life and the refusal of civilized beings to accept the constraints that their environment might seem to impose upon their ambitions. The fundamental challenge of Underdark architecture lies in learning to think beyond the horizontal plane that dominates surface construction, embracing instead the full three-dimensional possibilities offered by cavern environments, where walls, floors, and ceilings lose their conventional meanings. In the greatest of the underground cities, residential districts climb the walls of vast chambers in spiraling patterns that seem to defy gravitational constraints, while commercial areas spread across multiple levels connected by bridges, ramps, and magical transportation systems that allow citizens to navigate their urban environment as easily as surface dwellers walk along conventional streets. The vertical neighborhoods that characterize much of Underdark urban planning represent revolutionary approaches to community organization that take full advantage of the unique properties of cave environments. Individual family compounds may encompass multiple levels carved into chamber walls, with private spaces that exist at different elevations, while remaining connected through internal passage systems that provide both convenience and security. The social dynamics that develop within these vertical communities create new forms of neighborly interaction, as residents must cooperate in ways unknown to surface dwellers to maintain the complex systems of stairs, lifts, and climbing aids that make their neighborhoods functional. The engineering challenges involved in creating stable construction within natural cave systems require techniques and materials that push the boundaries of both conventional building methods and magical enhancement. The irregular surfaces and unpredictable geological conditions that characterize most underground building sites demand flexibility and innovation from architects who must work within constraints that change dramatically from one location to another. The successful integration of artificial structures with natural rock formations requires deep understanding of both geological processes and structural engineering principles that are rarely necessary in surface construction projects. The magical infrastructure that supports daily life in Underdark cities represents innovations that have no equivalent in surface urban planning, drawing upon the unique properties of underground environments to power systems that would be impossible to maintain in any other setting. The ambient magical energies that permeate many underground locations provide power sources for lighting, transportation, and communication systems that operate with efficiency and reliability that surpass most surface technologies. The Fairs-Rest radiation that characterizes much of the Underdark creates both challenges and opportunities for magical urban planning, requiring specialized techniques for working with and around its unpredictable effects, while offering unique possibilities for those skilled enough to harness its power. The defensive considerations that influence Underdark urban design reflect the constant threats that characterize life in the deep places, where communities must be prepared to withstand not only conventional military assaults, but also attacks by creatures whose capabilities may transcend normal understanding of siege warfare. The natural advantages offered by cave environments make possible defensive strategies that would be impractical or impossible on the surface, with choke points, killing zones, and fallback positions that can be integrated seamlessly into the everyday architecture of the city. The water management systems that supply Underdark cities with the fresh water necessary for large urban populations represent engineering achievements that rival the greatest accomplishments of surface civilizations, while dealing with challenges that surface engineers never face. Underground water sources often provide mineral-rich supplies that require sophisticated filtration and treatment before they become suitable for drinking, while the complex three-dimensional distribution systems needed to supply vertical neighborhoods demand pumping and storage technologies that push the limits of both mechanical and magical engineering. The waste management systems developed for Underdark cities must deal with disposal challenges that are unique to underground environments, where conventional sewage systems may be impractical or dangerous due to the risk of contaminating limited water supplies or creating health hazards in enclosed spaces. The innovative solutions developed by underground civilizations often involve biological processing systems that use specially cultivated organisms to break down waste products while producing useful byproducts that can be integrated into the city's resource management systems. The trade infrastructure that supports commerce within Underdark cities reflects the unique challenges of moving goods through three-dimensional urban environments where conventional wheeled vehicles may be impractical or impossible to use. The vertical marketplaces that serve many underground communities represent architectural and logistical innovations that allow merchants to display their wares while providing customers with access to goods from multiple levels of the breaking trading district. The specialized equipment and techniques developed for loading, unloading, and transporting merchandise through complex cave systems require skills and knowledge that are entirely different from those needed for surface commerce. The transportation systems that connect different districts within large Underdark cities often combine mechanical engineering with magical enhancement to create networks that can move people and goods efficiently through urban environments where conventional roads and vehicles would be inadequate. The cable systems, mechanical lifts, and magical conveyances that serve as public transportation in underground cities represent technological achievements that often surpass their surface counterparts while dealing with operational challenges that exist nowhere else. The residential architecture that provides housing for the diverse populations of Underdark cities must accommodate the varied needs and preferences of species that may have dramatically different physical requirements and cultural traditions. The multi-species neighborhoods that characterize many underground communities require architectural flexibility that can provide appropriate living spaces for beings whose sizes, mobility requirements, and environmental needs may be fundamentally incompatible with conventional building standards. The public spaces that serve as gathering areas, ceremonial venues, and recreational facilities within Underdark cities represent attempts to create community environments that can substitute for the parks, plazas, and natural gathering places that surface cities take for granted. The great halls and ceremonial chambers that serve these functions often represent the most spectacular architectural achievements within their respective cities, with spaces designed to accommodate large gatherings while creating acoustic and visual effects that enhance the community activities they are intended to support. The industrial districts that support the manufacturing and processing activities necessary for urban economies must be designed to deal with the unique challenges of underground production, where ventilation, waste disposal, and raw material transportation all require specialized solutions. The workshops, foundries, and manufacturing facilities that drive the economies of Underdark cities often represent innovations in industrial design that take advantage of geothermal energy, magical power sources, and specialized techniques that are available only in underground environments. The diplomatic architecture that houses the governmental and administrative functions of Underdark city-states reflects the complex political relationships that exist between underground communities and their need to project power and be authority in environments where conventional symbols of state power may be inappropriate or ineffective. The throne rooms, council chambers, and administrative buildings that serve these functions often incorporate defensive features, magical enhancements, and symbolic elements that communicate the city's power and status to both residents and visitors. The religious architecture that serves the spiritual needs of Underdark communities often represents some of the most innovative and spectacular construction projects undertaken by underground civilizations. The temples and shrines that serve various deities and spiritual traditions must create appropriate environments for worship, while dealing with the acoustic, lighting, and spatial challenges that characterize underground construction. The integration of natural cave features with artificial construction in religious buildings often produces architectural effects that seem to blur the line between the natural and supernatural. The educational facilities that train the next generation of Underdark citizens in the skills and knowledge necessary for underground life represent architectural challenges that combine the practical requirements of teaching and learning with the need to create environments that can inspire and motivate students. The academies, libraries, and training facilities that serve these functions often incorporate specialized features that take advantage of unique underground conditions to create learning experiences that would be impossible to replicate in surface environments. The entertainment architecture that provides recreation and cultural activities for Underdark populations must create venues for social interaction and artistic expression within environments that may seem inherently restrictive compared to surface alternatives. The theaters, gaming halls, and sports facilities that serve these functions often represent creative adaptations of surface entertainment concepts to underground conditions, while also developing entirely new forms of recreation that take advantage of the unique possibilities offered by cave environments. The memorial architecture that commemorates important events and individuals in Underdark history often incorporates natural cave features and geological formations in ways that create lasting monuments to the achievements and sacrifices that have shaped underground civilizations. These memorial spaces serve not only as tributes to the past, but as gathering places where communities can maintain connections to their shared history and cultural identity. The commercial districts that serve as centers of trade and economic activity within Underdark cities represent architectural solutions to the challenges of creating efficient marketplaces within cave environments where conventional commercial districts might be impractical. The multi-level trading complexes that characterize many underground commercial areas often incorporate specialized features that allow merchants from different species and cultures to operate effectively within shared spaces, while maintaining the distinctive characteristics that define their individual trading traditions. The agricultural districts that support food production for urban populations represent innovations in underground farming that combine traditional cultivation techniques with magical enhancement and specialized engineering to create productive growing areas within environments that would normally be considered unsuitable for agriculture. The fungal farms, hydroponic gardens, and livestock facilities that serve these functions often represent the most technologically advanced aspects of Underdark civilization, incorporating biological, magical, and mechanical systems that work together to produce reliable food supplies. As we contemplate these marvels of underground construction and urban planning, we begin to understand that the cities of the Underdark represent more than mere adaptations to challenging environments. They embody the fundamental human drive to create beauty, order, and meaning within any circumstances, no matter how seemingly impossible or restrictive. These underground metropolises stand as testaments to the power of intelligent cooperation and creative problem-solving, proving that civilized life can flourish even in the most unlikely places when communities commit themselves to the patient work of building better futures for themselves and their descendants. In the eternal darkness of the deep places, the lights of civilization burn as brightly as they ever did beneath open skies, illuminating pathways toward possibilities that exist nowhere else in all the worlds above. The lower dark stretches beneath the familiar territories of the middle Underdark, like an alien realm that exists according to physical and metaphysical laws that seem to mock everything that surface dwellers understand about the nature of reality itself. Here, in depths so profound that they approach the molten heart of the planet, the very concepts of space, time, and causality begin to bend and warp under pressures that transcend mere geological forces to encompass influences from dimensions and planes of existence that intersect with the material world in ways that defy rational explanation. The descent into these ultimate depths requires more than simple courage, or even the specialized equipment and knowledge that suffice for exploration of the upper levels of the Underdark. Those who venture into the lower dark must prepare themselves psychologically for encounters with phenomena that challenge the fundamental assumptions about reality that govern normal existence. The darkness that pervades these regions is not merely the absence of light, but seems to possess its own malevolent consciousness, actively working to confuse navigation equipment, extinguish magical illumination, and create optical illusions that can lead even experienced explorers hopelessly astray. The temperature extremes that characterize different regions of the lower dark reflect the proximity to planetary forces that operate on scales beyond normal comprehension. In areas where magma chambers approach the surface, the heat becomes so intense that the very air shimmers with thermal distortions that make accurate observation nearly impossible, while the radiant energy released by these underground furnaces creates atmospheric conditions that can be lethal to unprotected explorers within minutes of exposure. The specialized equipment and magical protections required to survive in these thermal zones represent some of the most advanced technologies available to Underdark civilizations. Conversely, other regions of the lower dark experience cold so profound that it seems to drain warmth not merely from the air, but from the very souls of those who venture into these frozen zones. The ice formations that accumulate in these areas possess properties that seem to transcend normal physics, maintaining their crystalline structure despite the absence of any obvious cooling mechanism, while emanating a cold that penetrates magical protection and insulated clothing with equal ease. The psychological effects of prolonged exposure to these supernatural cold zones include not only hypothermia, but also a creeping despair that seems to freeze the capacity for hope itself. The atmospheric conditions that exist throughout much of the lower dark create breathing challenges that go far beyond the stale air problems that characterize some upper levels of the Underdark. The gas mixtures that accumulate in these depths often include compounds that exist nowhere on the planet's surface, created by chemical processes that occur only under the extreme pressures and temperatures found at these depths. Some of these exotic atmospheres prove merely uncomfortable for surface-dwelling respiratory systems, while others contain compounds that can induce hallucinations, alter consciousness, or prove directly toxic to most forms of life. The magical instabilities that plague many regions of the lower dark create zones where spells behave in unpredictable ways or fail entirely without warning. These areas of wild magic and dead magic represent some of the most dangerous obstacles that magical civilizations must overcome when attempting to establish permanent settlements in the deepest regions of the Underdark. The unpredictable nature of these magical anomalies means that even experienced spellcasters may find their most reliable abilities suddenly ineffective or dramatically altered in their effects. The portals that connect the lower dark to other planes of existence represent both opportunities and extreme dangers for those brave or foolish enough to investigate them. These dimensional gateways open onto realms that operate according to entirely different physical and metaphysical laws, creating possibilities for exploration and contact that exist nowhere else in the known multiverse. However, the entities and influences that may pass through these portals from other dimensions often prove hostile to material plane life forms, creating ongoing security threats that can affect entire regions of the lower dark. The elemental plane of Earth maintains numerous connections to the deepest regions of the Underdark, creating areas where the boundary between dimensions becomes permeable enough to allow the passage of elemental creatures and influences. These elemental intrusion zones often feature geology that defies normal understanding, with rock formations that seem to grow and change according to their own internal logic, while supporting forms of life that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks. The connections to the plane of fire that exist in some geothermally active regions of the lower dark create environments where elemental fire creatures can manifest spontaneously from superheated magma and volcanic gases. These fire elementals often prove territorial and aggressive toward material plane creatures, creating ongoing hazards for anyone attempting to traverse or settle in these regions. The magical effects that result from prolonged exposure to planar fire influences can permanently alter the physiology and capabilities of creatures native to the material plane. The Shadowfell intrusions that occur throughout much of the lower dark create regions where the boundary between life and death becomes blurred, allowing for the spontaneous generation of undead creatures while creating environmental conditions that drain the life force from living beings. These shadow zones often expand and contract according to cycles that seem to correspond to events occurring within the Shadowfell itself, creating unpredictable hazards that can suddenly transform safe areas into deadly traps. The far realm influences that seep into the deepest parts of the lower dark represent perhaps the most dangerous and incomprehensible of all the extraplanar intrusions that affect the underground realm. These areas of alien influence operate according to logic systems that are fundamentally incompatible with normal reality, creating zones where the very concepts of identity, causality, and rational thought begin to break down. The creatures that emerge from far realm intrusion zones often possess characteristics that seem designed to drive observers insane, while the environmental effects of far realm influence can permanently warp both living beings and inanimate matter in ways that defy any attempt at reversal or treatment. The deep spawn that inhabits some of the most remote regions of the lower dark represent creatures whose origins and true nature remain mysterious even to the most learned scholars of extraplanar phenomena. These entities appear to serve as living portals between dimensions, capable of creating offspring that combine characteristics from multiple planes of existence while serving the incomprehensible purposes of their alien progenitors. The spawn creation process appears to involve the fundamental restructuring of matter and energy according to principles that exist outside normal physical laws. The varieties of spawn produced by these mysterious entities reflect the diverse influences and raw materials available in their respective environments, ranging from creatures that seem merely unusual by lower dark standards to abominations that challenge the sanity of those who encounter them. The spawn creation process appears to be ongoing and adaptive, with new varieties appearing in response to changing environmental conditions or the availability of new biological material to incorporate into the spawning process. The territorial behaviors of deep spawn reflect their role as guardians or manifestations of extraplanar influences, with each entity claiming and defending regions that correspond to specific dimensional intrusion zones. The methods they use to mark and maintain their territories often involve alterations to local reality that create permanent changes in the physical and magical properties of their domains. These territorial markings serve not only as warnings to potential intruders, but as focal points for ongoing extraplanar influence that continues to warp local conditions over time. The communication methods employed by deep spawn appear to operate through means that transcend normal sensory channels, involving direct manipulation of consciousness and reality perception that can affect observers at considerable distances from the spawn themselves. These communication attempts often prove highly disturbing to creatures with normal psychology, as they involve concepts and information structures that are fundamentally alien to material plane consciousness. The artifacts and structures that accumulate around deep spawn territories represent physical manifestations of extraplanar influence that often possess properties that transcend normal understanding of both magic and technology. These items may appear to be simple tools or decorative objects, while possessing capabilities that operate according to physical laws that exist only in other dimensions. The study of such artifacts has provided valuable insights into the nature of extraplanar reality, while also proving extremely dangerous to researchers who lack adequate psychological and magical protection. The time distortions that affect some regions of the lower dark create areas where the normal progression of cause and effect becomes unreliable, leading to situations where explorers may experience events out of their proper sequence, or find themselves aging at rates that do not correspond to their actual time spent in affected areas. These temporal anomalies appear to result from the intersection of multiple dimensional influences that operate according to different temporal frameworks, creating zones where linear time becomes a relative rather than absolute concept. The navigation challenges presented by temporal distortion zones extend far beyond simple disorientation to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of identity and continuity of experience. Explorers who spend extended periods in these areas may find their memories becoming unreliable, or discover that their understanding of their own personal history has been altered by exposure to non-linear temporal effects. The psychological counseling and magical treatment required to help such individuals readjust to normal temporal existence represents some of the most sophisticated therapeutic techniques available to Underdark civilizations. The gravitational anomalies that occur in some regions of the lower dark create areas where the normal relationship between mass and gravitational attraction breaks down, leading to phenomena such as floating rock formations, reversed waterfalls, and areas where different gravitational orientations exist within the same general space. These gravitational distortions appear to result from the influence of extraplanar forces that operate according to different physical constants than those governing normal material plane existence. The biological effects of prolonged exposure to gravitational anomalies include not only the obvious challenges of movement and navigation in altered gravitational fields, but also more subtle physiological changes that can affect everything from circulation and digestion to neural function and psychological stability. The adaptation techniques developed by creatures native to gravitationally anomalous regions often involve fundamental alterations to their basic physiology that allow them to function effectively in conditions that would prove immediately lethal to normal material plane life forms. The crystalline formations that appear throughout many regions of the lower dark represent manifestations of mathematical and geometric principles that seem to exist independently of normal mineral formation processes. These crystal structures often display properties that suggest they are not merely physical objects, but rather three-dimensional representations of abstract mathematical concepts that have achieved independent existence through unknown mechanisms. The resonance effects produced by these mathematical crystals create acoustic and vibration phenomena that can affect consciousness directly, inducing altered states of awareness that may provide insights into the fundamental nature of reality, while also posing significant risks to mental stability. The harmonics generated by large crystal formations can create standing wave patterns that persist for extended periods, creating permanent alterations to local space-time that affect everything from spell effectiveness to the behavior of living creatures. The research facilities that various lower dark civilizations have established to study these crystalline formations represent some of the most advanced scientific and magical installations anywhere in the known multiverse, incorporating safety measures and analytical techniques that push the boundaries of both conventional science and arcane knowledge. The discoveries made through these research programs have led to revolutionary advances in theoretical magic and planar science, while also revealing the existence of cosmic principles that operate on scales far beyond normal comprehension. As we contemplate these alien depths where reality itself becomes negotiable and the familiar laws of physics serve merely as suggestions rather than absolute constraints, we begin to understand that the lower dark represents not merely the deepest level of an underground realm, but rather a frontier zone where the material plane intersects with cosmic forces that dwarf even the grandest surface phenomena in their scope and implications. Here, in chambers that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions and passages that connect not merely different locations but entirely different realities. The very concepts of exploration and discovery take on meanings that transcend anything possible in the more familiar regions above. The darkness that reigns in these ultimate depths is not empty, but pregnant with possibilities that exist beyond the reach of normal understanding, holding within its embrace secrets that might unlock the fundamental mysteries of existence itself, while threatening to overwhelm any consciousness bold enough to seek them out. The relationship between the Underdark and the surface world represents one of the most complex and multifaceted interactions in the history of civilized existence, encompassing everything from desperate raids for survival to sophisticated diplomatic exchanges that shape the policies of both underground and surface nations. This connection between the realms of light and darkness is not merely incidental contact between neighboring territories, but rather a fundamental interdependence that affects the economic, political, and cultural development of both worlds in ways that neither could achieve in complete isolation. The earliest contacts between surface and underground civilizations occurred through accidental discoveries made by miners, explorers, and refugees who stumbled upon the entrances to underground territories while pursuing their own goals on the surface. These initial encounters were often marked by mutual fear and misunderstanding, as beings from both worlds found themselves confronting forms of life that challenged their basic assumptions about what constituted normal existence. The surface dwellers who first glimpsed the vast chambers and alien architecture of the Underdark often returned to their communities with tales so extraordinary that they were dismissed as fantasy or madness. The underground peoples who encountered surface dwellers for the first time faced equally profound challenges in understanding beings whose lives were governed by the rhythms of sun and weather, whose societies were built around concepts of open space and unlimited resources, and whose cultural values had been shaped by entirely different environmental pressures. The pale skin and light sensitivity of many Underdark natives made extended surface contact physically painful or impossible, while their enhanced dark vision proved useless in the bright illumination that surface dwellers took for granted. Despite these initial difficulties, the potential benefits of contact between the two worlds proved too significant to ignore. Surface communities possessed resources that were either rare or completely unknown in the depths, including certain types of food, textiles, and manufactured goods that could not be produced in underground environments. The agricultural surpluses that characterized many surface civilizations represented almost unimaginable wealth to underground peoples accustomed to the careful rationing necessary for survival in resource-scarce cave environments. Conversely, the underground realms possessed materials and knowledge that were equally valuable to surface civilizations. The rare metals and gems that could be mined from deep earth formations commanded enormous prices in surface markets, while the specialized techniques developed for survival in underground environments often proved applicable to surface challenges such as siege warfare, tunnel construction, and the exploration of dangerous territories. The magical knowledge accumulated by underground civilizations through their exposure to Fairsres radiation and other unique phenomena often surpassed surface magical traditions in both power and sophistication. The development of regular trade relationships between surface and underground communities required overcoming logistical challenges that had no precedent in either world's previous experience. The transportation of goods between realms separated by miles of difficult underground terrain demanded innovations in both technology and organization that pushed the capabilities of both civilizations. The establishment of secure trade routes through territories controlled by hostile creatures and rival factions required military cooperation and diplomatic agreements that transcended traditional territorial boundaries. The merchant expeditions that ventured into the depths to establish these trade connections faced dangers that went far beyond the normal risks of surface commerce. The environmental hazards of underground travel, including toxic gases, unstable rock formations, and extreme temperature variations, required specialized equipment and expertise that few surface traders initially possessed. The political complications of negotiating with underground rulers whose cultural values and governmental structures differed dramatically from surface norms demanded diplomatic skills that combined traditional negotiation techniques with entirely new forms of intercultural communication. The underground merchants who traveled to the surface world faced equally daunting challenges in adapting to environments and social conditions that were alien to their experience. The physical discomfort caused by natural sunlight limited their activities to nighttime hours and required the development of specialized protective equipment that could shield them from harmful radiation while allowing them to function effectively in surface environments. The social customs and legal systems that governed surface communities often proved baffling to underground traders accustomed to very different forms of social organization. The security arrangements necessary to protect these early trade expeditions led to the development of new forms of military cooperation between surface and underground forces. Joint patrol units that combined the surface expertise of some members with the underground navigation skills of others proved more effective than either type of force operating alone. The shared intelligence networks that emerged from these security cooperation agreements eventually grew into sophisticated information exchanges that benefited both worlds in areas far beyond simple trade protection. The economic impact of surface underground trade relationships extended far beyond the immediate exchange of goods to encompass fundamental changes in the economic structures of participating communities. Surface civilizations gained access to materials that enabled technological and artistic developments that would have been impossible using only locally available resources. Underground communities achieved levels of prosperity and population growth that allowed them to undertake construction and expansion projects that transformed the character of entire regions of the Underdark. The cultural exchanges that accompanied commercial relationships proved equally transformative for both worlds. Surface artistic traditions influenced underground aesthetic development, while underground innovations in architecture, engineering, and magical technique found applications in surface construction and technology. The intermingling of musical traditions, storytelling techniques, and religious practices created hybrid cultural forms that enriched both civilizations while creating new forms of artistic expression that belonged fully to neither world but drew strength from both. The diplomatic relationships that evolved from successful trade partnerships eventually encompassed formal treaties and alliance agreements that recognized the legitimate interests of both surface and underground powers in maintaining stable and prosperous relationships. These diplomatic frameworks required the development of new forms of international law that could accommodate the unique characteristics of underground civilizations while protecting the interests of surface communities that might be affected by underground activities. The military alliances that emerged from these diplomatic relationships created new forms of strategic cooperation that enhanced the security of both worlds. Surface military forces gained access to underground territories that could serve as secure bases for operations against common enemies, while underground forces acquired surface allies who could provide support and resources that were not available in the depths. The combined military capabilities that resulted from these alliances often proved superior to what either side could have achieved independently. The intelligence sharing agreements that developed between surface and underground security services created information networks that enhanced the ability of both worlds to detect and respond to threats that might affect either realm. The early warning systems that emerged from these cooperative efforts proved particularly valuable in dealing with threats that crossed the boundary between surface and underground territories, such as organized criminal enterprises that operated in both worlds, or military forces that used underground routes to launch surprise attacks on surface targets. The scientific and magical research collaborations that grew from these institutional relationships led to advances in knowledge that benefited both civilizations. Surface scholars gained access to underground laboratories and research facilities that existed in unique magical environments, while underground researchers obtained surface resources and perspectives that enhanced their own investigations. The joint research projects that emerged from these collaborations often produced discoveries that neither world could have achieved working alone. The educational exchanges that developed between surface and underground academic institutions created opportunities for scholars from both worlds to study phenomena and techniques that were unique to the other realm. Surface students who studied in underground academies gained understanding of magical techniques and survival skills that had no equivalent in surface education, while underground students who attended surface institutions acquired knowledge of agricultural techniques, political theory, and technological innovations that enhanced their effectiveness when they returned to their underground communities. The religious interactions that occurred between surface and underground spiritual traditions created new forms of theological understanding that enriched both worlds' spiritual development. Surface religious leaders who studied underground spiritual practices often discovered new approaches to meditation, divine communication, and community organization that enhanced their own religious effectiveness. Underground spiritual leaders who engaged with surface religious traditions gained access to theological concepts and ritual practices that provided new perspectives on their own spiritual beliefs and practices. The refugee movements that occurred during times of crisis in either world created temporary but significant population exchanges that affected both realms. Surface communities that provided sanctuary for underground refugees during periods of political upheaval or natural disaster gained access to specialized skills and knowledge that enhanced their own capabilities. Underground communities that sheltered surface refugees during wars or natural catastrophes often discovered new approaches to agriculture, craftsmanship, and social organization that improved their own living conditions. The criminal activities that inevitably developed around these legitimate exchanges created security challenges that affected both worlds and required cooperative law enforcement efforts to address effectively. The smuggling operations that sought to avoid the taxes and regulations governing legitimate trade created black market networks that often dealt in goods and services that were prohibited in one or both worlds. The organized crime groups that operated across the surface underground boundary developed capabilities and resources that individual law enforcement agencies found difficult to counter effectively. The espionage activities that accompanied the diplomatic and commercial relationships between the worlds created intelligence challenges that required both sides to develop new forms of counterintelligence capability. The unique advantages that each world possessed in terms of surveillance and infiltration techniques meant that traditional security measures often proved inadequate when dealing with threats that originated in the other realm. The development of effective counter-espionage techniques required understanding of both surface and underground operational methods. The environmental impacts that resulted from increased contact between the worlds created ecological challenges that affected both realms. The introduction of surface species into underground ecosystems sometimes led to biological invasions that disrupted established ecological balances, while underground organisms that found their way to the surface occasionally created new environmental problems that surface communities were unprepared to handle. The development of effective environmental management techniques required cooperation between surface and underground experts who understood the ecological requirements of both worlds. The technological innovations that emerged from the interaction between surface and underground civilizations often combined the best features of both worlds' technical traditions, while creating entirely new capabilities that transcended what either world could achieve independently. The hybrid technologies that resulted from these collaborations often proved more effective and reliable than purely surface or purely underground alternatives, creating new possibilities for development in both realms. As these complex relationships continue to evolve and deepen, they create an interconnected web of dependencies and mutual interests that ensures the future development of both worlds will be shaped by their ongoing interaction. The surface and underground realms have become parts of a larger system that encompasses both the bright territories above and the shadowed domains below, creating possibilities for growth and achievement that exist only through the continued cooperation and exchange between the children of sunlight and the masters of eternal darkness. In this great dance between light and shadow, both worlds find opportunities to transcend their individual limitations and reach toward futures that neither could achieve alone. The eternal cycle that governs the Underdark transcends the familiar rhythms of surface existence to encompass patterns of change and continuity that operate across timescales so vast that individual lifetimes become mere moments in the parted, greater flow of underground history. This perpetual dance of creation and destruction, growth and decay, conflict and cooperation shapes every aspect of life in the deep places, while ensuring that the underground realm remains a dynamic and evolving environment rather than a static monument to past achievements or failures. The geological processes that continue to reshape the physical structure of the Underdark operate according to planetary rhythms that dwarf human comprehension, while creating constant opportunities for both catastrophe and discovery. The slow movement of tectonic plates generates pressures that build over millennia before releasing in earthquakes that can reshape entire regions of the underground realm in minutes, opening new passages while sealing others, creating new chambers while collapsing ancient halls that had stood since before the rise of surface civilizations. Volcanic activity continues to play its role as both creator and destroyer of underground landscapes, with magma flows that carve new passages through solid rock, while occasionally breaking through into existing chamber systems with results that can range from beneficial warming of previously cold regions to devastating destruction of established communities. The unpredictable nature of volcanic events means that underground civilizations must maintain constant vigilance against threats that can emerge without warning from the planetary depths, while also remaining alert to opportunities that volcanic activity might create for expansion into previously inaccessible territories. The water cycles that sustain life throughout the Underdark continue to evolve as changing surface conditions affect the flow patterns of underground streams and the water levels of subterranean lakes and seas. Climate changes on the surface world can have profound effects on underground water supplies, with extended droughts reducing the flow of water into cave systems, while periods of heavy rainfall can create flood conditions that transform normally navigable passages into death traps for the unwary. The management of water resources remains one of the most critical challenges facing underground civilizations as they adapt to these ongoing changes. The biological evolution that shapes the flora and fauna of the deep places continues to produce new species and modify existing ones in response to changing environmental conditions and the introduction of new influences from other realms. The isolation of some underground ecosystems creates opportunities for rapid evolutionary change, while the interconnected nature of other regions allows for gene flow that maintains species stability across vast geographical areas. The arrival of new species from surface migrations or planar intrusions can dramatically alter existing ecological balances, creating cascading effects that ripple through entire food webs. The magical evolution that characterizes much of the Underdark represents a unique phenomenon where the ambient magical energies of the deep places interact with both living creatures and inanimate matter to produce ongoing transformations that follow patterns unlike anything observed in surface environments. The Fair's Rest radiation that permeates many underground regions continues to create new forms of magical creatures while altering the characteristics of existing ones, leading to the development of abilities and traits that push the boundaries of what conventional magical theory considers possible. The technological development that occurs within underground civilizations follows pathways that reflect the unique challenges and opportunities of subterranean existence, while incorporating innovations that emerge from contact with surface cultures and extraplanar influences. The specialized tools and techniques required for life in the depths continue to evolve as new materials become available and new problems require novel solutions. The integration of magical and mechanical technologies often produces hybrid systems that surpass the capabilities of either approach used independently. The social evolution that affects underground societies reflects their adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining cultural continuities that preserve essential knowledge and values across generations. The clan structures, tribal organizations, and city-state governments that characterize different regions of the Underdark continue to evolve in response to internal pressures and external challenges, while preserving the institutional knowledge necessary for survival in underground environments. The political dynamics that shape relationships between different underground powers remain in constant flux as the balance of power shifts in response to military victories and defeats, economic prosperity and decline, and the emergence of new threats and opportunities that require collective responses. The alliances and rivalries that characterize inter-community relationships in the Underdark operate according to pragmatic considerations that can change rapidly when circumstances alter the strategic value of different partnerships. The economic cycles that drive trade and resource allocation throughout the underground realm reflect the scarcity-based economics that characterize most Underdark communities, while adapting to changing availability of both local resources and imported goods from surface trade relationships. The boom and bust cycles that affect mining operations, the seasonal variations in fungal harvests, and the irregular supply chains that connect distant underground communities create economic conditions that require considerable adaptability from both individuals and institutions. The military evolution that shapes the combat capabilities of underground forces continues to produce new tactics, weapons, and organizational structures that reflect lessons learned from past conflicts, while adapting to new threats that emerge from the depths or arrive from other realms. The specialized combat techniques required for fighting in three-dimensional cave environments continue to develop as different civilizations learn from their encounters with each other and with the various creatures that inhabit the deep places. The religious development that characterizes spiritual life in the Underdark reflects the ongoing dialogue between established theological traditions and the unique experiences that underground existence provides to contemplatives, mystics seeking deeper understanding of divine purposes and cosmic truths. The deities that are worshipped in the depths often develop aspects and attributes that reflect the particular challenges and opportunities of underground existence, while maintaining connections to their broader theological frameworks. The artistic evolution that shapes cultural expression in the underground realm continues to produce new forms of aesthetic achievement that reflect the unique sensory environment of the depths, while incorporating influences from surface, traditions, and extraplanar sources. The acoustic properties of stone chambers, the visual effects possible with limited lighting, and the tactile qualities of underground materials all contribute to artistic traditions that exist nowhere else in the known worlds. The intellectual development that characterizes scholarly pursuits in the Underdark continues to push the boundaries of knowledge in areas ranging from practical survival techniques to abstract theoretical investigations of magical and planar phenomena. The unique research opportunities available in underground environments, combined with access to extraplanar influences and ancient artifacts, create possibilities for intellectual achievement that often surpass what can be accomplished in surface academic institutions. The generational challenges that face each new cohort of underground dwellers reflect the ongoing tension between preserving essential survival knowledge and adapting to changing conditions that may require abandonment of traditional approaches. The education systems that prepare young underground dwellers for adult life must balance respect for ancestral wisdom with recognition that changing circumstances may require innovative responses that have no precedent in historical experience. The immigration pressures that continue to bring new populations into the Underdark from surface refugee movements, planar displacement events, and voluntary migration for economic or political reasons create ongoing needs for integration and adaptation that affect both established communities and newcomer populations. The cultural diversity that results from these ongoing population movements creates both opportunities for innovation and challenges for maintaining social cohesion within underground communities. The exploration activities that continue to expand knowledge of unmapped regions of the Underdark ensure that new discoveries regularly reshape understanding of the underground realm's scope and characteristics. The deep expeditions that venture into previously unknown territories often return with reports of new species, unique geological formations, and previously unknown planar connections that expand the boundaries of what is considered possible within underground environments. The technological exchanges that occur through contact between different underground civilizations and between underground and surface communities continue to spread innovations that enhance the capabilities of all participating cultures. The adaptation of surface technologies to underground conditions often produces improved versions that prove superior to the original designs, while underground innovations frequently find applications in surface environments that their original creators never anticipated. The magical research that takes advantage of the unique conditions found in underground environments continues to produce discoveries that advance understanding of fundamental magical principles while developing practical applications that benefit underground communities. The interaction between magical researchers and the various extraplanar influences that affect the deep places creates opportunities for theoretical and practical breakthroughs that push the boundaries of magical knowledge. The environmental management challenges that result from the ongoing expansion of underground civilizations require constant attention to maintaining the delicate ecological balances that support life in resource-limited cave environments. The development of sustainable resource utilization practices becomes increasingly important as underground populations grow and their resource requirements place greater pressures on underground ecosystems. The diplomatic evolution that shapes relationships between underground powers and between underground and surface civilizations reflects the ongoing need for cooperation in addressing challenges that transcend individual community capabilities. The development of increasingly sophisticated diplomatic protocols and international law frameworks helps to manage conflicts while facilitating cooperation on issues of mutual concern. The security challenges that emerge from the ongoing evolution of the Underdark require constant vigilance and adaptation as new threats develop from the depths, arrive from other planes, or emerge from the interaction between different underground populations. The defensive strategies and military technologies that protect underground communities must continue to evolve to address threats that may possess capabilities that exceed previous experience. This eternal cycle of change and adaptation ensures that the Underdark remains a vibrant and dynamic realm where life continues to find new ways to flourish despite the challenging conditions that characterize underground existence. The deep places serve as a testament to the resilience and creativity of intelligent life, demonstrating that even in the most extreme environments, civilizations can develop, prosper, and achieve greatness that rivals anything accomplished in more hospitable surroundings. The ongoing story of the Underdark continues to unfold with each passing generation, written by the countless individuals who choose to make their lives in the eternal darkness while reaching toward futures that remain bright with possibility despite the absence of sunlight in the world below. And so we reach the end of our journey through the vast tapestry of the Underdark, that realm of eternal night that stretches beneath our feet like a hidden universe waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to venture beyond the familiar boundaries of sunlit existence. We have wandered together through chambers carved by forces older than memory, witnessed civilizations that flourish in conditions that would challenge the imagination of surface dwellers, and contemplated forms of life so thoroughly adapted to darkness that they represent entirely new definitions of what it means to exist and thrive in harmony with one's environment. The story of the Underdark is ultimately a story about the inexhaustible creativity of life itself, the refusal of intelligence and consciousness to accept limitations that might seem insurmountable to less determined spirits. In caverns where no natural light has ever penetrated, we find not emptiness but abundance, not sterility but rich ecosystems that support forms of beauty and complexity that rival anything achieved under open skies. The cities that rise from living stone represent triumphs of engineering and artistry that demonstrate how civilized beings can transform even the most challenging environments into spaces worthy of their highest aspirations. The ongoing cycles of change and growth that characterize the deep places ensure that new wonders continue to emerge from the darkness, reminding us that even in the most remote and shadowed corners of existence, hope persists and life finds ways to flourish. Rest now, gentle traveler, knowing that somewhere in the quiet depths below, ancient chambers hold their patient vigil, while new dreams take shape in the eternal darkness that embraces all possibilities.